Hello, welcome to today's and tonight's event for wherever you are. We are having, as you have already listened to, talk about several things. It's going to be really interesting because we have very special guests. We're going to talk about MiSTer FPGA, of course, MT32Pi, MIDI, MIDI, and PC gaming in general for the DOS era. So tonight I have the pleasure to be joined by D0pefish and by Flynnsbit, who are two very talented individuals that have done a lot of work. We'll talk about their work as we go, but D0pefish has been working on MT32Pi amongst several other things that I'll be asking him about, and Flynnsbit has been working on the MiSTer AO486 Top 300 DOS game pack. So how are you guys tonight?
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good, D0pefish. How about me?
Yeah, likewise. You sound great. I guess that's how the audience knows that it was a genuine MT32, that you actually had to do some switching over.
Yeah, I had to because I could have used a mixer, but I didn't want to. I wanted to just like patch it straight to the stream instead of using a mixer that could change the audio signature. So, how are you doing, guys? It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Doing great. It's Good Friday. It's way earlier for me, so 8 p.m. start. I didn't realize that we were going to start so late for other people, so I'm glad people are joining and listening in. Thank you for listening if you're somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, it's pretty late for you, right, D0pefish?
Yes, it's about 2 a.m. here, but that's okay for me. I'm pretty nocturnal anyway, so no problem on my behalf. Yeah, thank you. Likewise, thank you for inviting me onto this. This is fantastic. You did a great job with the last stage event. I was listening to that one.
Thanks.
So it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
No, it's really my pleasure. Thank you both for being here. And we're going to talk about your projects. But first, I'd like to introduce you to the audience and ask you first about what got you into games. What got you into games, D0pefish?
Oh, games. So I guess I started out with the Commodore Amiga, the 500 to be specific, from quite a young age. So my family got an Amiga 500 in the early 90s, and I used to actually watch my dad play Another World on the Amiga 500. So if you know that game,
awesome.
I used to be totally freaked out by that because it had some pretty sort of graphic animations, which were awesome. But back then I was terrified by them. I slowly sort of got into the Amiga games library. I used to play things like James Pond RoboCard and all the cool platformers used to have on the Amiga, Terrican 2. And so I'm a huge fan of the Amiga. That's my favorite machine. Yeah.
68,000 for the win, man.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And it's really interesting. Another World, it's an amazing game. It was also a very fond memory for me. I also played it in Amiga and then on DOS. And what about you, Flynnsbit? What got you into games?
Yeah, so I'm in my mid-40s. Most people have seen me on YouTube, so they know what I look like. I started my kind of computer career at a young age messing with a TI 994A. That was my first machine, and games like Parsec and coding in whatever was in the latest magazine at the time and saving that down to cassette. And then I moved on to consoles, and so that was like the NES era, and then TurboGrafx 16 is one of my favorites of all time. And then from there, I took a different path. I went PC. So I went DOS. I got my first 386 SX, 20 megahertz machine in the probably 89. I think I was like 11, 12. And then I spent all my time playing, DOS games. So it was anywhere from, the first King's Quest, Space Quest, and then of course into like Wolfenstein 3D, Falcon 3.0, Stunt Driver. Those are the ones that I played the most, which are of course in my pack. But then I veered off into BBSs. So I spent a lot of time in BBS world. So games like Legends of the Red Dragon and Barren Realms Elite, spent every waking hour playing those kind of games. So, and then just from there on.
Wow.
Nice.
So basically, you both got your started in this area of gaming, right? Where we were talking about how different it was from console gaming, and also from mainly what the experience that even PC gamers get today. What can you tell us about how it was growing up in an era that was so different regarding this, D0pefish?
I think the biggest thing for me was that most of the games that I had were probably, let's say, not 100% legit. Okay, so like as pretty much any Amiga owner can probably confirm, most of my disc boxes were full of handwritten labeled floppy disks, right? And so a lot of the Amiga gaming came from going around friends' houses and copying different games, right? So we had no internet back then, obviously, and there was no way to get software for the Amiga other than to buy magazines with the floppy disks literally stuck onto the front of them, or to maybe you'd have that one friend who had rich parents who had like a BBS connection or something, and they were downloading stuff. But that was the main way we got software. So there was a lot of like, I don't know how to say it really, sort of community spirit around the Amiga, like the swapping communities and things like that. And there was a lot of we had these things in the Amiga magazines where there would be advertisements for public domain software, and there'd be huge lists with tiny fonts with like names of software that you could buy for like £1 each, right? And you'd send a check off to this company, and maybe a few weeks later you'd get these random discs in the post. And you had no idea what was going to be on them, and that was, I kind of missed that in a lot of ways. It's quite fun to go through all the like internet archives where people have managed to archive these disk images and relive that, because now it's so easy to just grab stuff from Steam and play it like 10 minutes later, right?
Yeah, I was jealous of the Amiga magazines because of that disc that was in there. We didn't necessarily have the same advantage on the DOS side of things. You didn't have that once a month disc that was coming in. For me, it was BBSs, right? That was, I guess it started a little bit before that because my brother is much older than me. And so he was in college, and that's when, the 5 1/4 inch floppies were being passed around, and, those 80s games that you just couldn't get. Either you're buying it at the store, but again, just like D0pefish, kind of a underground community that when people start finding out about, I don't know, it felt exclusive back then. It's funny, a bit like the MiSTer community now, the way that we share, and it's a pretty tight knit group, and it gets exposure, but like back in the DOS days, there weren't very many people that were doing that, and especially being connected. So as soon as the BBS started, that's when you had a very tight knit community, and that's when sharing definitely, just like D0pefish, lots of floppies and backups and hundreds of discs, and figuring out how to archive all that. I had a different problem because I hosted a BBS as well. So how do you make all that available for people way back when? So fun though.
Yeah, it was a very, very different experience, but also it was very different in terms of what we got when we bought a computer, right? You got the instructions for how to repair it, and also how to code for it, and even the SDKs, if you could call them that. You had programming languages bundled with the computer, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about just the DOS books that come, with if you bought DOS 3.1, 5.0, I mean, you got everything imaginable, telling you every command and and everything available to you. You know, back then when I got my first PC, again, I talked about that 386SX. You sit it down, it doesn't have an OS on it. You install the OS and it drops you to an A prompt or a C prompt, you know, and you got nothing. It's like, you know, the first thing you type is help, and luckily there was help there, and you had to figure it out, which is kind of how I ended up here, spending all that time.
It sounds so strange how today you just think, just search for a web page or a YouTube video even, right?
Right. Yeah, impossible back then.
How did you get into learning this stuff, D0pefish?
As in like the programming side, or
Yeah, well, kind of using it. How do you even remember how you learned how to load games? Because I know Amiga's different, but Commodore 64 or you had to learn something, right? And maybe for some Amiga versions, you had to learn a bit of the internals to make the stuff run, right?
yeah, there was a little bit of that. But I think for the majority of Amiga software, especially the stuff that was aimed at just the plain vanilla Amiga 500 or 1200, most of the software you would just put the disk in and turn it on. Like, it would boot straight up, and you wouldn't have to type a single thing. It would boot straight from the disk. If you had like, but I did have to learn how to work around problems, because later on when I upgraded to the 1200, a lot of Amiga 500 stuff stopped working because the thing with Amiga games is, I think a lot of programmers back then were transitioning from the 8-bit era to the 16-bit era, and they were very used to programming in a way that sort of hit the hardware directly and made a lot of assumptions about how the machine worked. So as soon as they got given this Amiga, where the specifications could kind of change depending on what model you went for, because you started with the 500 and then you went up to the 1200 with the 020 and more RAM and everything, then all those assumptions stopped applying, right? And the software broke. So I used to have to do a lot of downgrade, like you used to get these downgrading tools. I guess you might have had that in the DOS days as well, to turn your 486 into something a bit slower. But we had to do
hit the button.
something similar.
We had a turbo button that was completely it was counterintuitive at best.
Yeah,
right?
turbo slower, right?
Yeah, because you had games that were simply ran too fast based on the clocks, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you had these games that were programmed using CPU delays, which obviously nowadays we know that's not a good thing to do. But back then it was just accepted. That's how you did it. That's how it was always done. And yeah, it caused problems. But luckily, we've got all sorts of tools now to work around them, to work around these problems, like WHD load and all sorts of things like that. You usually just end up killing all the features of the CPU if you've got a fast CPU. So if you've got like a 68040 or 60, if you're very lucky, you just turn all the caches off, and if that doesn't work, then you've got to start patching things. But that gets a lot of stuff working if you turn the caches off, if I remember right.
Yeah, and what about you, Flynn? How do you remember learning this stuff? Was it somebody else that taught you? You figured it out by yourself?
Yeah, some of it. So, I mean, if you can't tell, I get attached to things. So I have I'll grab a hold of something, and then I'm invested in it. It's my passion, and it's what I spend, a majority of my time doing. And so even way back then, number one, having the opportunity to have my own, think about being a teenager back in, the 80s, late 80s, and having access to a full DOS machine, 386. My father was in IT, and he enabled me a bit. So he was like an old school mainframe developer, still codes in COBOL. And so he taught me the ropes, at least how to move around the OS, but also basically said, here you go figure it out. And of course that was in my bedroom. So, just like kids these days, you give them a PC in their room and they're playing video games all day. Mine was learning every single little thing about DOS and what I could do with it. And then of course, when I figured out you could dial out, then it was, I spent all my waking hours doing that kind of stuff. So, yeah, just fiddling with it and, 12-hour sessions sitting behind the keyboard, banging away at something, trying to figure it out and ultimately growing. And again, I don't play a whole lot of games. I play games, but I get a lot of my enjoyment out of figuring out things that not a whole lot of people have done. So even back then, when I felt like, there's maybe, it felt like there were 300 people in the world that were doing what we were doing back then. So that's the fun part for me.
Yeah, that was an amazing era. In some ways, feels so innocent, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't really even think about the piracy angle back then. Small town, think, middle America, very small town, 10,000 people. You're not thinking about that. But of course, it was pretty rampant back then.
It really was.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of ground to cover, and I don't want to rush things, but how did you guys find about MiSTer?
Ooh. Shall I go first?
Yeah, sure.
I was put onto it through MT32Pi actually. I'd heard of the Minimig project all the way back when it was its own board, because I mean I've talked about Amiga already, so I've always sort of had my ear to the ground when it comes to developments in the Amiga community. So I knew of Minimig, and I'd kind of heard about MiST, but I didn't really pay much attention to them at the time because I was kind of, I was just using my real hardware. But I was vaguely aware of them. But I wasn't aware of MiSTer until I'd sort of done some stuff like the beginnings of MT32Pi, and a few people on Twitter like saw me tweeting and it blew up slightly, and I ended up in Smoke Monsters Discord, and I met some really cool people there, and yeah, they were asking me, have you heard of MiSTer? Like, MiSTer's this FPGA thing. You should look at this. It's got all these cores. It's got all these computers and everything. And I was just like, wow, okay. And then I started paying attention because I'm now in a situation where I can't really have all this random hardware all over the place. I haven't got a very big accommodation. So
I know the feeling. I have to clean up daily.
Yes. So the MiSTer is a great solution for that, and yeah, and now I'm very happy to own one. So yeah, I'm very grateful to the people that put me onto that, and also got one for me to help me get MT32Pi brought across to it.
Yeah, it's an amazing community, really.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. And how about you, Flynnsbit? How did you find out?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's a little bit of the same story, but a bit different. So I'm a collector. I'm a console collector, and I have lots of consoles, and trying to get them all out, get them connected, and into the RGB mod community, and RGB modding all my TVs so that I could get the right input signals, and you get into the YouTube loop of finding, all of these different, basically how can I get all my consoles connected at once so that I can play what I want to play, and ended up in Smoke Monsters videos. So, his YouTube videos, and I think it was when so I got my first MiSTer in March of 2020. And it was, I think it was when all of his, I ran across all of his daily videos on each console. And, I was going down the ODE route and trying to mod all my consoles for that. And then I was like, what's this MiSTer thing? This looks way better. And so yeah, bought my first one and put it together, and the rest is history. And then, you know, I definitely got attached when I got to see when Sorg and Robert were going back and forth on the AO486 code. That was maybe a month or two there where they were working on the L2 and L1 cache, and the forum was on fire and Discord was on fire, and that's when everybody got me hooked. So
yeah, it just, everything rolled from there, right? It's been quite a ride. So you guys have talked a little bit tangentially about your projects, and now you work on that game pack that solves so many problems, that has CDs, floppies, curated list of multiple top 100 DOS games. You had to verify each game for compatibility, flag games that have difficulties with memory managers, and all that things. Could you tell us about that, Flynnsbit?
Yeah, it started, you know, again, with my background, I was like, we can do more with this. And again, before the AO486 code changes that really brought it from pretty slow, call it 386, you know, or maybe even 286 before all the cache stuff. When all those changes happened, it really just added stability. Number one, the stability increased exponentially. Number two, the speed brought it in again up to, you know, we were watching it creep up 486, you know, 25 megahertz, 33 megahertz, you know, getting close to kind of the 66 megahertz. And that's that sweet spot of games for me personally. And so I was like, okay, we can. So I started with I'm just going to, you know, I built an image, did full installs of kind of all the OSs, messing with them. So I started with the OSs, and it was like, okay, which OSs are the most compatible? DOS 5, DOS 6, DOS 622, you know, moving up all the way into, you know, Windows 98 and the version of DOS that comes with that. Even OS2, I'm an OS2 fan from way back in the day. So I spent probably too much time trying to get OS2 working on the core. And then went back and was like, okay, how can I make DOS, all the DOS games that are available, easier for people to digest? Because it's hard, right? When you talk about the different memory managers and what game can support what, and how can you make it a bit more plug and play? And so when I went down that path, we started with... I started with a product called WBAT, and it's a scripting language that basically allows you to do front-end interfaces, like text-based interfaces. And I was building that manually, so I was going by each game, and I was like, okay, this is going to take 22 years to complete. So then talking with people on the Discord and just getting ideas, went down the Launchbox path. And so the Launchbox for DOS had been released and available, but you quickly run into some limitations. Number one, you're still curating that entire list. Number two, it was you had a limit. There were 300 games, and I'm like, okay, I want more than 300 games. And so I went down. There's a collection out there called Total DOS Collection, and it's, you know, that's all about saving the history of exactly how the DOS game was, all the images, all the versions. But again, there was so much work to get that into a runnable state, like if you were to put a cartridge in a console. And so then, of course, I stumbled upon. Actually, I was looking for products that index and have all the metadata and all of that. And there was the Metropolis launcher, and I think that's one of my first videos I did. And it was basically pulling in all of the, because you could, in Metropolis launcher, you could pull in either Exodos or Total DOS collection, and then you could export. And it actually had Total DOS launcher, the open source product that we use today in the image, which is the front end. It had it built in, and it had created this nice index and this nice front end, and it pulled in all the metadata. I was like, oh my gosh, this is way closer where we need it to be. And of course, you start running into some of the challenges with the core around memory, around, you know, some of the DPMI memory issues, and then just DOS in general, how complex that is. And so that's when we converted over to the Exodos converter, and we worked a couple of months on that to get that all the code into that to where it could manipulate Exodos the way we need it in AO486. And then I did the first, I think the first packs I did were the date packs. So I think those were around October is when I did those. And then the next step, I was like, okay, can I get 7,000 games into a single interface in DOS and working in the core? And when I say working in the core, does the interface come up, and can you run through all the games? And we got there and spent a lot of time making sure that every single game could actually, all the metadata and everything could come over. And then of course you run into compatibility issues, and I thought that was going to be easy, right? I remember talking to the Discord and saying, oh, I'm going to get all 7,000 games in there and these are all going to be playable. And then reality set in as, when I released that one and everybody was kind of messing with it. It was like, okay, this game doesn't work. This game doesn't work. I'm like, okay, none of this works. Like I've got to start over. And so that was when it's like, okay, I need to pull this down to something manageable. And there's not 7,000 good DOS games. I'm sure D0pefish can say that about Amiga too.
Yeah.
And so we pulled it down to 300. And again, everybody jokes about, oh, this game is missing from the pack, or why did you pick these games? And it's one of those things, you can see all the process that I went through and all the thought I put into it. And again, that's probably months of work. And then when it got to creating the top 300 pack, I spent 5 minutes on it. Fredo can attest to this. I literally went out, did a Google search for underrated DOS games, top 100 underrated, top 100 DOS games, and I took like 3 different lists, combined them, took out the duplicates, pulled it down to 300, made sure it had some of my favorites in it, and then that's it. And we still have it today, and I created that back in October. And then it was, and I streamed this, it was like, okay, I'm going to drink a bunch of coffee and I'm going to record all this. And really the recording was for me to go back and figure out what the hell I did with each game, and just kind of sat there and cranked through it over a weekend. Like, how do I, and the goal back then, this is interesting. If you go back and watch the stream, all I was trying to do was get 300 games working with Sound Blaster. So the top 300 pack that's sitting there, even today, the intent was just, can I get Sound Blaster functioning with every one of these games in the list? And so we can pause there, because then we get into all the MIDI stuff and kind of how we got there.
That's the kind of segue. Many people probably that are listening to this haven't experimented with the 486 core, but there's this huge barrier, right? That you helped to remove or make it easier for the average user, because it's really difficult to understand everything that's under a DOS machine from the time. You needed to understand how Hyman, how memory managers, how drivers, ports, Sound Blaster, ini files, configs, bats. You had to learn quite a bit around the hardware, because it was evolving a lot, right? You had a lot of sound interfaces, soundboards like the Sound Blaster, but you also had this transition area where only I recall getting like Sealfit for DOS, right? And it included this beautiful manual that has the MT32 advertised and the interface to connect that, and it was like $1,000 for one and $1,000 for the other. Who would play that, right?
Yikes!
But the thing is, this runs us into, what is MIDI, D0pefish?
MIDI. Oh, okay. So MIDI stands for Monkey Island Digital Interface.
It does for us.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. It's musical instrument digital interface. And it's like a standard. It's a standard that came out in, hang on, let me check my notes.
Like 1980s.
1983, all the way back then. And it sort of defines both a hardware interface and a protocol for musical instruments to talk to each other. So the idea is like I could take any keyboard that has a MIDI port on it and any other MIDI compatible musical instrument and play it from a remote keyboard. So that's like a basic setup. Then when you start getting computers involved, then things really get interesting, because then you can have the computer playing a whole orchestra of instruments all at once. And it was sort of, because it was the early 80s, it was developed around the kind of 8-bit friendly protocol. So it does have its limitations, but the thing is, like, the limitations weren't that bad. I mean, we only just got MIDI 2.0 last year, so it's been good for like 34 years. I think it's probably one of the better standards out there that we've had in the computing industry. But yeah, it just defines a way for any musical instrument and computer to be able to talk to each other without any like hassle, really. You can use it to record yourself. You can use it to do music production. You can use it just for playing video games, all sorts of purposes. You can even use MIDI for things that it was never meant for, because it's so flexible. Like I know there's some systems that use MIDI as a way of controlling lights, like lights. So it's not just me that's heard of that. Then you see,
of course,
it's very useful.
And since this was happening, the DOS Gaming got this, because you had the sound cards. That sound cards usually had an FM chip, right? And it was not like in Japan where people had experience with FM for, I don't know, 6 or 5 years before this happened into the personal computer area. But we also got MIDI ports on those sound cards, or interfaces like the 401 that communicated with any such device. And companies like Roland started and sold interfaces that were meant to be controlled by the computer and by musicians, of course. This evolved over time, right? What can you tell us about those early versions of the MIDI standard on computers before GM, General MIDI, and what is that?
Was that to me or to Flynn?
Yeah,
I can answer too. For me, it was,
please go, Flynn.
You know, where it started for me, and I don't know if this is where it started in the industry, but the combination of the Roland MT32 and the MPU 401 interface on a PC, right? Like, and then of course gaming companies like, you know, I would say probably Sierra is the one that everybody knows, and they feel like they were one of the first ones. But, you know, when you think about everything that D0pefish said, the other part of that is you can have you've got a musician controlling all of those interfaces using real instruments and synthesizers, and then they can digitally record it in data that is very, very small. And back then, you know, that was key, right? Getting that kind of music just was not, it just wasn't available to anybody. Even me back then, I had a Sound Blaster 1.0 and I thought it was amazing. And of course, the difference between that and a MIDI device is exponentially, you know, that much better. So for me, it was all about, again, that digital interface to the computer, and then the MT32 being able to, you know, synthesize that and play it out just like if the instrument was sitting there. So
yeah, maybe we should introduce the audience to what does a MIDI device like this synthesizers do, because it's basically a specialized computer that has its own ROM, probably has some samples later on, but at first it was what concerns us right now, MT32. You can probably tell us a lot about LA, D0pefish.
Yeah, I can't. I'm at risk of getting a lot of this wrong because I don't know that much of like the core internals of how the MT32 works. But that is, it is kind of special, that synth, because it not only has PCM samples, so sampled sound stored in ROM, but it also has like waveform synthesis as well, and you can combine them, and that was one of its tricks. So there's quite a few games that will create custom instruments by sending the MT32 special commands that basically reprogram the synthesizer to sound different than what it does with just the factory presets that it comes with. And so that's why when you play an MT32 specific game, it doesn't necessarily work very well, if at all, when you've got it connected to like a general MIDI device, a later generation device. So yeah, it's quite a quirky machine in its own right. And the thing about MIDI is that there's no audio being transmitted with MIDI. It's all just about the controls and about the note data. So that's one of the reasons why it's so efficient. You're literally just telling the machine what notes you want to be played by that machine. So the synthesizer is listening to these commands and executing them with a very small microcontroller, like you say. So it's kind of like its own computer in its own right.
Yeah, and also from what I know, it's kind of like an analog synthesizer as opposed to the samplers or rumplers, or many are called later on, right?
Yeah, I believe so. So that's what I was referring to with the with the reprogrammable synth part.
I've heard those being referred as patches, and I understand they are transmitted via SysX commands that not any MIDI interface can transmit nowadays, right?
Yeah, so every MIDI interface is supposed to be able to transmit and receive SysX, which if you don't know what that is, that's it's sort of a system exclusive. System exclusive commands are variable length data packets that can be sent to any synthesizer and can go beyond the core MIDI standard. So you can send a special MT32 specific message to the MT32 and it will do its own things. So these kinds of messages are usually written in the back of the manual, like we were referring to earlier with the computers. Most MIDI devices will have a big section at the back of the manual with all the special extra features that they have that you can program with SysX commands. And yeah, like most MIDI interfaces can handle that no problem, but you do have some of these really, really cheap MIDI interfaces that you find on Amazon and eBay that appear to work okay, because if you play just basic notes on them, everything seems fine. But the second you start to try SysX commands, which you'll run into very, very quickly if you play any MT32 game, because they always do some setup at the beginning, then things are going to sound really weird because half of those commands won't have made it through the interface. So if you're, I'm going to take this opportunity to send a public service announcement. So like, if you're going to buy a USB MIDI interface, do not get that black one with the shiny silver cables coming out of it. It's the same one every time, and it's about $3 or something like that. Do not get that MIDI interface. It's terrible. You're going to have
a bad time.
You are going to regret it instantly. There's going to be no Monkey Island at all if you get that. Or like,
agreed.
You might get a really horrible, janky version of it at least. But yeah, go and get a UM1 or something nice.
Yeah, the Roland ones are very nice too, and I recall another brand that started with M that does work as well. I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, I ran into that issue as well because Dune 2 or Akumayo Dracula Castlevania and X68000, they need to have full control, right? And those simply didn't work because I was trying to record what the X68000 sent and have my own MIDI files with SysX, and that was I ended up using DOSBox and an old computer and old software to do that.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's funny about the MT32 because we had the MIDI standard, meaning the interface, but MT32 was like the instrument, like what is it there? Like 120 something, call it channels, right? D0pefish. And you were stuck with that. Whatever they said might not be like an example when the general MIDI standard came out, where you knew what it was going to be when you sent a signal there, right? Two very different, that's why it was not quite compatible later on.
Yes.
Yeah. It's, as far as I understand it, you have like the MT32 mapping. It's kind of where general MIDI went to, because Roland was in the board standardizing that.
Right.
But they did make several changes. The first SC55, that's another very common synthesizer for MIDI. There's the first model that is not general MIDI and has several instruments in the wrong places for what general MIDI ended up being. And you have the MK2 version of that SC55 that does have the proper GM mappings. And many games work or were designed with one of those in mind, right?
Yeah, and on the DOS side, I actually did a little research for this because I wanted to grab some stats. So on Moby Games, for general MIDI, there's 374 DOS titles that support general MIDI. There's 917 DOS games that support MT32. Wow. And then there's 127 games that support SC55. And then I see the chat talking about the other platforms. When you get into the other devices, that number goes down exponentially, right? I think the Atari has like 10 games. Macintosh has like 10 games. I don't know what
Amiga, D0pefish.
Something like that, yeah. They're all just ports of the Sierra games. It must be like between 6 and 10. I can't remember.
And then the 68,000, the only one I ever hear anybody talk about, Castlevania.
There's a bunch of them that are really good.
Yeah.
There are several arcade ports. You got Gradius 2 that does support several soundtrack versions. You have the Yamaha FM soundtrack for the 2151 plus the 80 PCM chips. You have the MT32 version that combines the Yamaha and the MT32, and then you have the SC55 version, so you can play with either of those or even combine, because you could get the drums from the MT32 and FM synthesis combined with LA synthesis.
Right.
Same does the Akumajo Dracula. You have several Capcom games like Street Fighter 2 with GM, or well, not GM. That doesn't have GM. That has SC55. But you have also like Ghouls and Ghosts. Daimai Kaimura does have general MIDI support. So you have a whole bunch of games that support that, and even games that combine synthesis from several devices.
I'm ready for my fully configured pack for that, ready to go.
Oh wow!
Oh boy, you're in for some work. There's already some work done on that by several communities. It's not my time to talk about this, but they are mainly cracks. I saw that you were working on dumps from the original games instead of the regular, or at least I saw that was part of the documentation from your project, or for Exodus at least.
Yeah, they're both.
And the X68000 packs that are out there are usually fully cracked. There is no pristine, clean dumps because they're very difficult to run on the real hardware. So it depends on the protection from the floppies, right? So
yeah, that's the challenge with trying to go plug and play too, because boy, the DOS copyright protection is all over the place. You know, it was not standardized. You know, everybody had these printed out wheels or code pages that are in the book that you, or go find this word on this, you know, on this page, on this sentence, and trying to do that. You know, the biggest limitation I was actually going to do, again, back to the Total DOS collection, which is a completely pristine version of that DOS game, right? Exactly the way that it was on the floppy for that version. I mean, the copy protection's still there. And so what you run into is you need the ability to see that, like you need the ability to see the manual. And so like if you're on Windows 10 and you're running Exodos or any of those, and you have a graphical interface, you've got the PDF of the manual right there. Pretty easy to pull up and find that copy protection. But on MiSTer, you're in DOS, right? So that was one of the gives was, you know, on a lot of the games, especially the top 300 pack, those are ready to go. They should play right out of the box. Of course, we've been running, and as people test, we run into some of them, like Prince of Persia wasn't perfect. Had to really dive into that one and figure out, you know, how that one really worked and fix it. You know, a lot of those games, there's probably 40 or so of those games that we had to go back and kind of revisit. But yeah, I mean, again, the goal is sit down, keyboard and mouse, and just play like you would on a PC, you know, or if you're, you know, if it supports joystick, use a controller. So.
Yeah, that's a lot of work because you need to figure out which is the proper correct source, and validation on that is really difficult to find, like flux dumps and figure out if those files are pristine. That's a lot of work, man.
Yeah,
but
for me, it was building on the work of others. People, you know, you take it. Somebody has taken a project to a certain point, and then okay, where can we go from there? And again, using like Exodos as the base, lot of work there. All the scripting, verifying games. That's like 10 or 12 years of work that Exo had done. You know, to talk about a passion. He spends all of his time working to make sure that that pack works correctly for the maximum amount of games that are available for DOS and for that era. And now Windows, he's got a 3.1 version that would be a lot of fun to get working on MiSTer as well.
And speaking about that, how easy was it to configure every one of those for MIDI support? Yeah,
so it's funny. D0pefish and I kind of stumbled into that, to, you know, believe it or not. I would say not 90% of the work was done with, you know, again, we started with the top 300, and then he and I started talking about what can we do with MT32Pi and how can we interface that. And I guess it was when we had MPU control was the first utility, right? And then now we have the MT32Pi, which is a DOS program that literally sends signals to the MT32 and can tell it whatever we want. So prior to that, we were, you know, kind of going through what would that interface. And I did have the forethought. There were, in the Exodos collection, it uses DOSBox. And so one of the functions of DOSBox is a utility. I think it's called mtconfig. And then you basically can tell it, okay, DOSBox, go, you're gonna be an MT32 or you're gonna be an SC55. And Exodos had already configured those to be able to switch the DOS games, their configs. So there's always an extra folder in every one of the DOS games. There's a Sound Blaster folder, there's an MT32 folder, and there's an SC55 folder. Those folders already have that specific DOS game's config file and any other binary files that allow it to switch between those three sound platforms. So Sound Blaster, MT32, and Sound Canvas are the three options. And what the batch shell scripts go in, they just literally go, when you pull up that menu and it says pick your sound, it goes and copies those files into the root of that game and then starts the game. And so, again, when I originally did that, it was just, okay, I'm just going to get Sound Blaster working. And then when D0pefish we were going back and forth on MT32, I was like, I think I'm almost there. And so, literally, I think it was over whiskey and gin and anything else and it was probably 2 a.m. He and I going back and forth usually. And, we got MPU control working where we could control the Pi. And then we switched to the MT32, and I basically did a find and replace in the code. And instead of telling DOSBox to do the change, all I do is tell it was like 3 different changes: the Sound Blaster, the sound canvas, and the MT32, and we just flip the command. So the command literally just goes in and changes it to tell the MT32 to switch, and then the game copies the files down for it to be MIDI instead of Sound Blaster, and it plays the game. I think there's 147 games that have that ability in the top 300. So you can switch depending on if it's General MIDI, Sound Canvas, MT32, or Sound Blaster. Those all should work. And all it's doing is I flipped that DOSBox command and said, don't tell DOSBox to switch the config, tell the MT32 Pi to switch the config, and it worked.
Awesome. So now that Flynnsbit has already introduced a bit about what MT32 Pi is, D0pefish, could you tell us what it is?
Sure. So basically, MT32 Pi is a bare metal implementation of the MUNT emulator. So MUNT is the software we use to actually emulate the MT32, as well as FluidSynth, which we're using as the sound font synthesizer, which gives you General MIDI, GS, XG, whatever the sound font can do. Basically, it's a sound font implementation, and it takes those synthesizers and it gives them a dedicated bare metal environment for them to run on the Raspberry Pi. So normally you'd run these programs on a PC or a Raspberry Pi on Linux, right? And you'd have to either manually start them up and configure all of your sound interfaces. If you're on Linux, trying to get low latency audio working is always it can have steps involved. It can.
Let me just make a small note there. When you are running bare metal, you're doing that because you want the full attention of the CPU to be on the task you're given it. If you have an operating system environment, the operating system is tasked with doing multitasking, basically, and it gives all priority to all things that are running. Sorry about the parentheses. Please.
Yeah, perfect. That's exactly what it is. There's no operating system in the way. There's nothing that can take time away from MT32 Pi. MT32 Pi kind of is the operating system. So MUNT and FluidSynth are the only things that are running on that Pi. So what we can do because of that is dial the latency all the way down. We can have really, really small buffers for the audio. We can service incoming MIDI very, very quickly. We don't have to go through loads of abstraction layers. On a modern PC, having those layers is kind of fine because you're dealing with multiple gigahertz on a modern desktop PC, right? And, a millisecond here and there isn't really a problem. But on a Raspberry Pi, it can make a bit of a difference. And when I was working on this, I kind of approached it from the musician point of view, where you really want to try and get the lowest latency possible. And I'm sure most MiSTer enthusiasts are like pretty well informed about latency. That's a lot of the point of MiSTer, is you can just throw away all of that stuff that emulation suffers from in terms of latency and accuracy. You can have a very deterministic environment to run the synth emulator on this bare metal environment, and it seems to work pretty well. It was all by accident, by the way. It was like a weekend project that got out of control.
Oh, we all know about those.
Yes,
it's the same for my DOS pack. It was literally, I can get this done in a weekend, no problem.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling. But then you started for a weekend project, and what happened to D0pefish?
Well, it kind of. The ideas existed for quite a long time because MUNT and FluidSynth are quite mature projects now. They've existed for a very long time, and there's some good YouTube channels such as Phil's Computer Lab. Have you heard of him? Mm-hmm. He's got a few videos on setting up dedicated mini PCs for running MUNT and FluidSynth, just to be a machine to run those synths for your retro PC. So the modern PC does nothing apart from run Munt and Fluid Synth, but then you've got your real 486 on the side that's sending the MIDI to that. That's been done for quite a long time now. And back in 2017, there was a thread on Vogons. So Vogons is a forum that, and then the name stands for Very Old Games on New Systems, I believe. But the forum has quite a lot of sections in it, and there's a lot of people there, not only just trying to hack old games to run on Windows 10 and stuff like that, but they're also very enthusiastic about old 486, 386 era PCs, sound cards, MIDI interfaces, all that stuff. So everything you'd ever want to know about like 90s and 80s PCs, it's all on that forum. And there was this...
If that forum comes down, we lose a huge chunk of knowledge, right?
Yeah, we're screwed if that forum goes away.
And I lose about half my day of reading because I wouldn't know what to do with myself without it.
But then you were in Vagan. Sorry about the interruption.
No, not at all. It's true. It's an absolute Aladdin's cave of information.
Yeah, I love that place. Yes.
And so I like yourselves, I was browsing this forum because it's great just to read through some of the threads. And one of the threads was crazy idea, MT32 Wave Blaster card. So for context, a Wave Blaster card is something that you attach onto a Sound Blaster. A Sound Blaster card has a header on it, a little pin header, and the idea is you can upgrade the Sound Blaster to give it a more powerful, more realistic MIDI synthesizer. So you can attach, I think a popular one was like the D0pefish, stuff like that. You could attach to the card, and then you instantly got a better MIDI synthesizer. Someone had the idea of putting a Raspberry Pi onto the Wave Blaster interface and running Munt on the Raspberry Pi. And I was reading this thread and I was thinking, this is cool, because I was just building a 486 at the time. I was trying to build like a DOS machine. And I was reading through it, and the guy had some plans, and he was going to use a Raspberry Pi Zero, which we know by now that wouldn't have worked. But going through the threads, I sort of joined the thread and I was like, hey, we could probably use something like build root, so we could script a build system that would generate a very, very minimal Linux environment to run Munt or run Fluid Synth, and it would start up very fast. And I actually went away and I tried this, and so I made a GitHub repo called mt32-pi and made a build root script that built this exact thing. And it kind of worked. It wasn't complete. It just sort of did enough to almost get you Munt running. And it had a few jitter related problems related to the audio buffers and stuff like that. And it was usable, but it wasn't perfect. And
when was that? When was that first check-in?
That was probably February 2017.
Okay.
I think. And then I kind of lost interest in it. Like I'd done it, and the guy had his own plans, which didn't end up coming to fruition. But I'd done my experiment, and I'd moved on because I was at university at the time, so I was busy with things. And there was a few stars being added to this GitHub repo in the background, and someone opened an issue there saying, "Hey, it would be really cool if this was on bare metal." And this was opened in 2018. So a year later, and I instantly agreed because I'd looked around and seen some other bare metal projects on Raspberry Pi, and there was people trying to simulate Amiga floppy drives with bare metal code on the Raspberry Pi and stuff. And we know now that kind of works. We see projects now like the Pi Storm where they're emulating the entire CPU on the Pi and plugging it into an Amiga 500. Like, that's just crazy stuff. I love it. But I didn't actually make the jump to trying that out until last year. So basically, it took a global pandemic for me to actually act on this issue. So this basically was my lockdown project. I think a lot of people probably ended up in this situation where they found themselves having a bit more free time from not being able to work or whatever, or go into the your workplace. So I was going through my old GitHub projects, and I thought, you know what, let's give this a try. And in about a weekend, I had months running on top of Circle, which is the bare metal environment I use, and I posted a quick video on Twitter of it running, like scum VM on a PC, piping MIDI into bare metal Munt, and that's when the Twitter just blew up, and I had to just keep going. So
by popular demand.
It seems that way, yeah.
And how did you find about this project, Flynnsbit?
Yeah, I think it was interaction on, specifically the MT32 project. Yeah, I think it was interaction on Smoke Monster's Discord, and we started talking about, there was a AO46 channel that was kind of had dried up, and we were, interacting over there, and that's how I got introduced to it. Of course, he had, D0pefish had matured that pretty far, enough where I could start tinkering. So again, I'm a tinkerer. I want to make something do something it's not supposed to, and so I've been around Raspberry Pis since the very first one, and IoT and all kinds of things. I've run half my pinball machines on Raspberry Pis, so that tinkering for me was how I got into it, and that's how he and I met. So, and again, pandemic is what gave me the time to kind of sit down and focus without so many distractions. So yeah, probably wouldn't have this today without that, which is funny.
Yeah, it's funny how the pandemic has changed our dynamics. It slowed me down, but it has boosted many other projects. And well, I'm glad it has boosted a bunch of projects like it did for you guys. And talking about that, if I want to build one of these, what do I need?
For MT32 Pi?
Yes.
The bare minimum you need is a plain old Raspberry Pi 3, B or B plus or above, so Pi 4 would work too, and the USB MIDI interface. So you basically just need the Pi to run it on and some way of getting MIDI into the Pi, and that's the most off the shelf, I just want to throw money at it kind of way to get that setup working. And what that gets you is a very basic setup with no screen, no high quality audio, because you're using the Raspberry Pi's headphone jack at that point, right? Which it's not really a proper hi-fi stereo output on the Raspberry Pi. It's a very cost reduced machine, so the headphone jack is good enough to make some noise, but for a project that's meant to be for a synthesizer making high quality sound, it's not ideal, but it does work, and some people are happy with that, and that's okay. It's the bare minimum. So you can try it out with just that. You can get a USB MIDI interface for about 20 to 30 pounds. I'm not sure how that translates to dollars, but it can't be that much different.
Yeah, like the UM1's like maybe $60. So
okay. So yeah, that's like a premium one. There are some good, like less expensive ones, but if you just want to have a guaranteed perfect MIDI interface, then the UM1 is like one of the, I would say it's probably the gold standard for MIDI interfaces, right?
And you have a list of the ones that people have been testing and all that on your wiki, right? Dope.
Yeah, so there's a few that are quite popular, and some of those have made it onto that list. There's one that I had until it blew up, so I've had to like kind of awkwardly move it off the list because I can't test it anymore, which was the M Audio Uno, I think.
I have one of those. Yes.
Yeah, some of them work and some of them don't, so I think they've changed the design halfway through the product's lifetime or something. You go digging around on Google, and some people on Linux are like, I have to load firmware for this device manually, and I'm just wondering, what are they doing? Like, I think they've rebuilt the same interface a few different ways. So I've put a question mark on that one, but there's a few others that are good. As long as it's not that literally $3 thing with the silver cable, then you're probably fine.
Now, that gives you what do you need on the other end? Like, I've got if I have an X68000, I just need a MIDI cable, right? For example.
Exactly, yeah. So if your host machine, the thing that's going to be sending the MIDI data, has a MIDI port built in, so it could be the X68K, it could be an Atari ST. They have built-in MIDI too.
An Amiga.
Amiga has Amiga doesn't have MIDI built in, but you can get MIDI interfaces for the Amiga. So that would be a serial port based MIDI cartridge or box. There's quite a few of those around, and you would plug a MIDI cable from the out port on that interface to the in port on your USB MIDI interface. A lot of interfaces are like literally cables, so they have male connections on the end. So if you have a cable from something like an X68K, you probably need like a gender changer to make that cable fit into the end of the USB cable. But they're not very expensive.
Yeah, or you could build your own. And what if I have a MiSTer? What do I need if I do have a MiSTer to connect it?
So that's when your options start opening up. So if you're the sort of person that thinks you might want to use MT32Pi with MiSTer and other things, then you probably want to look at the hardware solutions that have the MiSTer interface, which is the one wire connection to the MiSTer from the Pi. As well as the traditional MIDI ports, so that you can swap between them and connect it to different things. So you could look at things like the Pi MIDI from Edu Arana in Spain. He has quite a few. He's had quite a few revisions of this hat, which appeared very quickly after the project kind of blew up on Twitter. He got to work fast and made this interface that was amazing, and he sent me a few prototypes.
He makes a lot of stuff. He
does, yeah. He's like a hardware machine in the retro communities. So yeah, and recently he updated that to mimic what the MiSTer hat does. So his hat does what the MiSTer hat does as well. If you just want to use it with the MiSTer exclusively, then your cheapest option is to get the official MiSTer hat. So that's the design that Sorgalig made, and it's the little square thing that you see in all the pictures people keep posting on everywhere. It's quite nice. So that gets you a direct connection to the MiSTer with one cable, and if your PSU is good and the cable is good, then the Pi will work. It'll actually be powered by the MiSTer, so you don't need a separate power supply. Although your mileage can vary a little bit because there's differences in people's setups, but usually it works pretty well.
And the physical buttons and the LCD too on that one, which is cool.
Yes, yeah. I think that makes it for a lot of people because they like to see the level bars going up and down and stuff. So,
and what about does the MiSTer support adding a USB MIDI interface and connecting it that way to the Raspberry?
It does, yeah. So if you have one of the hats that's intended for real MIDI hardware, like the older versions of the Pi MIDI where there was just the real DIN MIDI interface, or if you go for something like the Clumsy MIDI, which is an open source design where you can solder it together yourself. The PCB designs are freely available and anyone can make their own. You can then just get a USB cable from the MiSTer to the Raspberry Pi, and you can then use Binary Bond's MIDI Link software that's built into the MiSTer to connect the FPGA core to the USB interface, via the Linux HPS interface, and that routes the MIDI through, and then the MT32 Pi can receive it that way.
So basically you have a lot of options. And any option that I didn't ask about?
There is an upcoming feature for the next version of MT32 Pi, which will let you do MIDI over the network. It's not really MiSTer specific. It's more for people that maybe have software running on their PC that they occasionally want to use with MT32 Pi. So you could have the Pi running connected to Wi-Fi, and then you can run some software on your Windows or Linux PC to send MIDI over the network via Wi-Fi or Ethernet, and you can do it that way. If you're on Mac OS, that feature is actually built into the operating system, so you don't actually need any additional software. There's a protocol that's part of the OS since the Tiger days, like 10.4, all the way back then.
Wow.
It's been a feature of Mac OS for quite a long time. So I decided to try and implement that protocol so that there'd be quite a lot of options for people wanting to do MIDI over the network. So it's not released just yet, but it is in testing, and people have had some success with it. So I'm quite excited to put that into the next version.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, there's some quite late night sessions with Wireshark trying to debug the protocol and make it all work. But luckily, there's quite a lot of open source software that uses this protocol. So I was able to figure it out by studying source code of other projects and learning from that.
How's the latency there when you're doing it that way?
It's so I set out with a very pessimistic expectations, and I thought on a Raspberry Pi, because I imagine a PC, like a desktop PC, would be perfect for this, where you've got a hardwired connection or like a good quality wireless AC card or something like that, where you just wouldn't notice anything. And I thought the Pi would probably be a bit like bad because it's it's quite an inexpensive thing. It hasn't got the best Wi-Fi chip in the world.
A bit like the audio port.
A bit like, yeah.
So you're testing it via Wi-Fi instead of because older models do have the Cat5 port, right?
Yeah, all of the B models have the Ethernet, but I went straight for the worst possible situation to make sure that it worked with that. Apart from that, if you've ever seen my desk, it's just covered in wires. So I was trying to avoid another one. And you know what? It's fine. It works pretty well. I did a quick video on Twitter a few weeks ago where I played the Pi live using a keyboard so that the keyboard went from USB to the PC. The PC went by Ethernet to the router, and then the router via Wi-Fi to the Pi. And I'm playing the keyboard, and it's fine. Like, there's no horrible, noticeable delay. It just felt fine to play. So for people just playing music over the network, I think that will be a pretty reasonable option, you know?
Yeah, it's freeing, right? It frees you from a lot of hassle. And it's funny because MIDI does have some... it's not consistent in the times that it sends commands, right? If you like play twice the same melody from the same computer to the same interface and record them, they are not exactly the same.
Yeah, it's kind of real time. It's when you receive the MIDI note, you just got to hope that it gets played as soon as possible. The network protocol that I've implemented has facilities for time stamping and for compensating for lost packets. So it has a way to recover, say, if your Wi-Fi drops out, the state of the MIDI channels is kind of preserved in a journal, and then the client is sending back what its last good state was, so that the server that's sending the MIDI packets can send a delta and fix it up. But it's not implemented yet. but the protocol can handle it. So I might get around to that someday, and that would make it more robust. But yes, MIDI is prone to processor delays, things interrupting. Just dragging the scum VM window around on a desktop PC could delay the MIDI. It's just how it works.
I know, that's something that I stumped on when I wanted to just port MD Fourier to run in something like this, and it's something I'll have to deal in the future with.
Yeah.
Regarding this, what's your favorite setup for this, Flynnsbit? How do you run your setup?
Yeah, I've got two setups. One is you probably saw it on the Twitter image. That's my kind of my PC station. So I'm using, a Dell, nice Dell Trinitron monitor, in MiSTer. And then I've got a Pi 4. And then on that one, I'm still using my breadboard because I wanted to use that 2.4 inch OLED that D0pefish and I got working. We spent, I don't know, that was probably maybe a day or two going back and forth to get that one implemented. And that's one of my favorites just because I love the large screen. And then the second one,
Yeah, it looks nice.
I have the MT32 Pi, the official one. So, one of my videos, I wanted to go through the start, from the very beginning. If you wanted to create this yourself, taking Sorg's, PCB, Gerber files, get those printed for yourself, grab the parts and build it completely yourself. That was kind of the intent there. And so that's my main system that's on my TV, where I that's my couch surfing setup, and it works perfectly. So and that's just a Pi. I think that's a Pi. That's an A+ with that aluminum case that we probably sold out of whatever store was selling that. They had an influx of orders. That's the geek. What is it? The geek worm case, something along those lines.
Yeah, it's got two names that we know of, at least, the geek worm or the U-geek. So
yeah.
I think there's two suppliers that have the same design somehow. I don't know what's happened there, but it's AliExpress, so it's not that much of a surprise.
Yeah,
so that's
probably the same one, but
yeah. So that's the smaller Pi. It's still a Pi 3B plus, but in a much smaller form factor. And then again, the form factor fits perfectly with the board and the hat that snaps on top of that, with the LCD. And then again, I own a 3D printer and printed D0pefish's vertical stand for it, which is awesome. So that's my main, couch playing setup. And then I've got kind of a more PC setup with keyboard and mouse. So those are my two setups.
Nice. What about yours, D0pefish?
My MT32 Pi setup changes on an almost hourly basis, depending on what people are complaining about in the GitHub issues or on Discord. So
I know that feeling. Yes.
yeah, I've got a few different setups that I use for testing different configurations, because I've tried to support quite a lot of popular hardware that you can use with MT32 Pi. So there's a few different styles of LCD and OLED that you can use, and so every time I touch the graphics related code, I've got to make sure it works on all of the different screens that I've got support for.
Oh boy.
So yeah, you end up with like a matrix of different support configurations, and it can be quite time consuming to test things out. But my go-to one is the Sorg design hat with the MiSTer, because it's just so convenient and it doesn't take up so much room on my desk. My most recent addition to the test setups is a CM4, so Compute Module 4 I/O board, which is the biggest Raspberry Pi that you can find. So it's almost like a mini ITX motherboard with a PCI Express slot on it and everything.
Wow, awesome.
With the
it's
dev,
a really cool board.
like the dev breakout that it snaps onto, I guess.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a carrier board that has every possible I/O of the CM4 exposed on it that you can just use to build something that doesn't look so ridiculous. So that's my main test setup, because it's just got everything out in the open, ready to plug stuff into and everything. Very good board. Someone donated that, and I'm extremely grateful for that. It was one of my wanted hardware things. I've got a list of Pis that I don't have, like the Raspberry Pi 2 and the CM3. I think someone's developing a product based on the CM4, so they wanted me to have this so I could try and make sure it works, and then we can get this thing working.
That's cool.
But it's become my favorite Pi because it just looks insane.
I have to check one out.
Yeah.
Sounds very interesting.
I think it's worth noting too the mixing capabilities of that hat, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because you need mixing because many sounds don't necessarily come up from the synthesizer, right?
Right. Like, most, again, I'm thinking in the DOS days, a lot of the DOS games were developed so the music that's playing, you have the ability to do MIDI, and then the any of the effects, so like the gun effects in Doom, those kind of things, those are still going to be FM, and or it's Sound Blaster generated. And so back in the day, your Sound Blaster, you were either mixing back through your Sound Blaster, or you had a mixing device sitting between your speakers. That was actually my original MT32 setup, with a real MT32 and an SC55, and then I'm mixing back in to get kind of the double sound you needed. And of course, in MiSTer, with the way that it's implemented, you get that naturally over the the single cable, which is amazing. It makes it such a clean setup.
And how do you regulate levels between those?
Yeah, so I mean, you've got the normal MIDI, you've got the normal MiSTer audio control for both, again, the global config and the core config, and then, of course, in DOS games, you have yet another volume control that might exist for those specific games, and then you have the MT32 and specifically the MT32 Pi, which has its own audio, and then of course D0pefish added the gain ability. Probably worth talking about that. And then when you get it back over into MiSTer, the only other thing that you can do is control the volume of the MT32. So there's, again, we talked about it at the beginning, there's those sysx commands that I probably spent a day or two going through and generating sysx commands for my pack so that I could just control volume. And of course, I asked D0pefish after the fact, and he was like, "Oh, here, they're on my GitHub or wherever they were." It was so funny. I was like, "Oh, great." But anyway, you can control the volume of that device as well as the core. And so some of the games in the pack, I'll send those sysx commands before the game kicks off because I know that it's out of whack between the mixing. But most of the time, it's really, really good. It's what you would expect on a real piece of hardware.
Yeah, because you're using digital protocols instead of mixing in the analog domain, right?
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about that setup. The I2S that's set up. It's digital signals. You're not using the Pi's audio hardware at all in that setup. You're getting a digital signal, and you can pipe that out. Of the Toslink, a Toslink connection, and or straight through the HDMI audio. So you get a really, really clean audio signal from both devices, both, kind of the Sound Blaster side and the MT32 Pi.
And you send it by Toslink or HDMI afterwards?
For me, I do, yeah. Definitely the best way, even out of the MiSTer, to get nice, clean audio.
Yeah, but maybe people don't imagine or can't envision how it's done usually. The MT32 has two ports for the output of the audio. You have the MIDI cable going in. You have the power cable coming in. You have to take those audio out, RC. Well, it's not. It's TRS outputs, and put those into a mixer. Take out the audio from your PC, or imagine doing it with a MiSTer. You have to convert your audio to analog, place it into a mixer, and then bring that back to the place you're listening to. So it's a real rat nest of cables. I'm used to it, but it's they don't know how much they're saving space on cabling with this, right?
Yes, definitely.
Right. Like my main...
Sorry.
I was just going to say my main computer upstairs, that's my 486 with again, the 4 different devices trying to get all the audio and everything mixed correctly and playing on my Roland speakers. that takes effort. Whereas on the MiSTer, it's one cable and you're good to go.
Yeah, when I play on my setup currently, I have to have one of my audio cards is digitizing the MT32 and mixing it digitally, and that would be the way. But when I'm playing on like the X68000, you have to have this whole mess of things, right? That external piece of hardware that mixes analog audio. That's part of the experience back in the day, and you are saving people that hassle.
Yeah, there is one trick you can do with some of the later synthesizers, which is the kind of ghetto thing that I do, which is where if you have something like an SC55, some of those have an input that will mix it lets you basically daisy chain multiple synthesizers together. So for my little stack, I've got a Roland MT32, the MU2000, and then an SC88 Pro. And I've got the MT32 going into the MU2000, the MU2000 going into the SC88 Pro, and then the SC88 Pro goes to my mixer along with the output from my computer or whatever else I want to do. So you can get away with it sometimes, but it's still a lot of wires behind all of those synths. And so when you've got something like the MiSTer with just one USB cable, you have no idea how much you're saving with that, because there's so many wires involved in setting up essentially multiple devices with power and audio and everything. It becomes spaghetti very quickly.
And also you are daisy chaining the MIDI from one device to the other, right? Because you have small MIDI patch cables to connect from each one so you can output the same MIDI command to the whole chain, I guess.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, because I know that as well. But some of those don't have volume controls for balancing the input and output, and some do.
Yes.
So you're left to your own devices even then.
Yes, so I'm lucky with these models that they have volume knobs up front, but I'm sure there will be other synthesizers that are very minimal, like maybe the more sort of compact module type things where they don't have any front control panel, where you just couldn't get away with that. So yeah, most people that invest in real MIDI synthesizers will probably end up with a mixer on their desk as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm taking my SC55 can't control the mixing volume. It simply mixes at the line level that it has. It can control the output volume, but that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The SC8850 can do that. Does have a control, but it's up to the model. And here you have individual controls, and you're sending everything digitally. It's very interesting. And talking about that, I'm forced to ask, does it support filters?
As in MT32 Pi?
Yeah. I'm asking because some of these have some low-pass filtering, or, well, I haven't measured it, but if it could be measured, does it support it, or is it part of what the project will eventually do, or not?
You know what? I have no idea.
Okay.
Maybe Munt has some options that I haven't exposed yet, because it has quite a lot of stuff you can do to change how the simulated digital to analog stage happens. So there is a mode in Munt where you can make it simulate what the original MT32 did and deliberately introduce noise into the output signal. So if you go and look at the MT32 wiki page, you'll find a little bit about the DAC, and in some versions of the MT32, there was some kind of problem with the DAC stage, which meant that it kind of got distorted slightly. And what the Munt project did was make the default be it fix that bug. But if you really want to recreate the noise, then you can put that back. And there's a few other options as well, which I haven't exposed yet. And I basically just haven't done it because no one's asked me to really. I don't think anyone's got any burning desire to make the sound quality worse deliberately, but it can be done. As for fluid synth, I think that's got filters. It just depends on the sound font that you use and whether it makes use of them. I'm not sure about whether they're controllable via MIDI. I think it's all up to the sound font to wire up different parameters to different MIDI CC controls and stuff. So yeah, I'm not too sure. I think your mileage varies depending on what your setup is.
Yeah, it's this point because there's this discussion about if noise is something you want, but also noise, not only noise, but shaping, because these things had analog output stages, right? Yeah, every single one of these, like you mentioned, and shaping the audio signal to curve or compensate for those curves could be one of the, I'm not saying you need to do it, but it could be one of the goals, right? Because I have to tell people, D0pefish here made the Amiga version of MD Fourier. That's a project that does this. I'm not pushing what it is, but I want to tell that you did that, and you did that like in a weekend. So that was amazing.
Yeah, I need to get back onto that because there's been so much activity that I need to catch up on with suggestions, and it's probably not going to take me long. It's just been one of these things where I've been distracted on other stuff.
No worries.
But yeah, it was great to see people picking that tool up very, very quickly and coming back with all these different test results on all the different Amigas. So I think I've got a lot to learn from that, because you guys have obviously done a lot of studies to do with EQ shapes and filtering and stuff, and I haven't got a clue about any of that. So
no, there's so much stuff to learn that we can't cover everything, every one of us.
Yeah. But
talking about that, you've worked also on the PT1210 MK1 project, right? Not Amiga related, I'm saying. What's that? Could you tell the audience what that is about?
Yeah, of course. So PT1210, so the name comes from ProTracker, which is arguably the de facto file format for Amiga tracked music modules. Just about every game or demo will use some kind of module for the soundtrack. So ProTracker has resulted in, it's basically a tool for writing music on the Amiga, and it's resulted in an absolutely enormous amount of music available in that format for the Amiga. And the 1210 part comes from the model of the most popular DJ turntable that you can buy, which is the Technics 1210 turntable, which is very popular among DJs because it has the pitch control on the side. So the idea, my friend Akira was, who's a member of EAB, and he's in quite a lot of the Amiga communities. He had this idea of having two Amigas side by side in place of the turntables, and being able to DJ Amiga music with two Amigas, and being able to mix between them with a hardware mixer. And he wanted basically a mod player, an Amiga mod player that would let you change the pitch up and down, add loop effects, have different cue points, all the features that you would see in a modern DJ software package, or something like a Pioneer CDJ, where you're able to press buttons and skip instantly to various points in the song, so that you can mix from one to the other and pull up all these different interesting parts in the song. And then Hoffman, who is another one of my friends, who's a huge name in the Amiga scene. He's one of the best Amiga musicians that has ever, has ever been active on the platform. Like if you look at his back catalogue of demo scene in Amiga music, you will not be disappointed. It's just absolutely phenomenal. But he's also a bit of a programmer as well, and he wrote the software for Akira. So Akira was designing it. He designed the user interface and the concept, and Hoffman did the programming in assembler, in 68K assembler. and they released the first version of PT1210 at the revision demo party. I can't remember which year it was, but it was a few years ago now. And it got very popular, and people on YouTube are using it, and there's all sorts of people, asking about, oh, can you add these features in, and can you add this and that? And one of the limitations of the original version was that you couldn't browse between folders. Like, you had to have all the mod music in one folder. And Hoffman's programming experience mainly came from the classic way of Amiga programming, where you take over the whole system and you program it like a demo or a game, where you just get rid of the operating system and you take over the whole machine. And it kind of worked, and it's usable. But when you want to use features from the operating system, like load different directories and browse different drives and stuff, it gets really difficult when you've killed the operating system. It just doesn't work. So they needed some help rewriting parts of that program to work in a system-friendly manner, so that you could keep the operating system working, and then use some of the essential features without ruining any of the performance or anything, or changing how the audio sounded. So that's where my involvement started. I joined the project and I started rewriting chunks of it in C, just in plain C. And it was a good time to do it, because when I started, the Amiga GCC project had really gotten to a good stage. So there's a guy called Bebo who has ported the GNU GCC compiler to 68K. Kind of backported almost, because there was an old version of GCC for 68K, but then it fell out of maintenance, so it was a very, very old version. But now he's kind of brought the new versions of GCC back to the Amiga, and we've made a lot of progress. We've rewritten almost, I would say, about 60% of the whole program is now in C and system friendly. So you can start it from Workbench and it works mostly.
Awesome.
And it's a lot of fun to work on.
Are you doing all that from from real Amiga hardware, or are you using the
MiSTer?
I've started using the MiSTer because it's just so much more convenient. The one thing that I have on hardware that I don't have on the MiSTer is a 68030, and that's important for a developer because you have the MMU. And when you have the MMU, you can catch all sorts of memory-related problems. You can detect bad memory accesses like null pointer dereferences and stuff like that, and you can't do that with the 020, which is what the Minimig core currently has. So if MiSTer got an 030 or just something with an MMU, then that could be my main semi-real dev platform. Otherwise, I just use WinUAE quite a lot because it's a very good mature emulator.
Yeah, it's convenient. Talking about that, Flynnsbit, have you ever thought? I'm not throwing work at you. I'm just thinking.
I'll take it.
I'm thinking about the trackers and I've kind of worked on this on the XTC8000 for my own convenience and on DOSBox, but an environment to play MIDI files from your setup, like a jukebox, that kind of thing is something that would be interesting when combined with MT32Pi, and you have a lot of MIDI files. It's a huge setup, and for many games and rips and even MIDI files from elsewhere, because people, when they think MIDI, they don't think what we are talking about. They think the terrible sound font from Windows back in the 90s, right?
Yeah, I'm about 90% done with that. So there's always the last 10% is 90% of the work. So I started on that, a pack that is a music pack. Binary Bond created a brand new interface. It's really, really cool. Allows you to pass in different trackers depending on the extension. So it's all very much like Total DOS Launcher. Obviously, want to give him 100% credit for all the Total DOS Launcher changes that happened specifically for MiSTer for my packs. He's working on a front end interface for that allows for that specific thing. So think the same a list. So the curated list would be a combination of all the MIDI soundtracks, which I've got pulled down, sorted into folders, using long file names, based on all the games. So you could go in, and the only one that's there is Monkey Island, but that's the only one we need. Just kidding. There's hundreds of those soundtracks that are already. So I've got that curated. So that's where I started, is how do I get it into just the file format, and structure, and how can I make it easily indexable? And then mod archive is obviously a popular place where you've got all the XM mod, basically all the different file formats that exist for the DOS side of the mod scene. And those are really nice curated lists. So I've got that pulled down and sorted and kind of dwindling that down to a manageable pack, because you can imagine how large that is. Just like on the Amiga scene, the music scene is just as large or larger. And eventually I do plan to source some ideas from the community. I can't just open that up completely or it'll never get done. But I'm going to put more time than 5 minutes into deciding what goes in there. And then again, that front end interface. So pull down a VHD, pull down a virtual hard disk image, throw it into AO486, hit go, and then the other cool thing that Binary Bond did was it can handle multiple trackers. So based on file extension or what you select in the config file, you can pick, I want to use, and pick, there's a bunch of different tracker players out there, and or MIDI players. So that's the intent. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of 3 different projects I'm working on, and that's one of them.
Yeah, because sourcing original software from the era that works for every single case is interesting task,
and
right?
Yeah, and then you add on any kind of core differences. So there are differences between the AO486 core and what a real DOS machine runs. So you've got to know kind of your limits and your barriers. And to be frank, there's just a lot of testing. So it's like, okay, this, version 1.54 of this latest tracker doesn't work. Back it up 2 versions. This is where the memory manager changed, and this memory manager works with that tracker on the core. Now that's the one that will be the base for playing all those musics. So, and then multiply that times, 10 or so different paths you can take. And then of course you still run into the memory issues that you had in DOS. And now we do have the trick that I wish I would have come up with 30 years ago, which is to just bounce the system and automatically select the memory manager for that, change a config file, and launch whatever you were trying to launch in the first place. That would have made things so much easier on me. Yeah. And I didn't really think about it until we got into MiSTer, and that would have absolutely worked back then. But anyway, yeah, Music Pack is on the list. That will be a lot of fun, and it is planned.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And on X68000, you have like this player that also plays everything you throw at it because it's a smaller scene. And this kind of would make it like a perfect jukebox. Like, I want all this folder music played back in the background, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there are some of those in the DOS setup too, but again, you run into, there's not a perfect one. And so it's more like there's 7 of them. But being able to play a jukebox, to just basically kick it off and just play file after file or shuffle, and have the other big thing that kind of the realization in the way that we originally built the packs is that has an index file that's generated way ahead of time. Number one, so that you can get thousands of games in a DOS interface and have it be searchable and quickly find a game.
Okay.
That's nice. On the music side, we don't necessarily need that. We don't need it to be indexed because you're not going to have that many files in there. And so what that gives us the ability to do is people can add to it, or we could have MiSTer scripts that go out and pull from different sources of public archived, music like Mod Archive and things like that, where this stuff is curated, and have it drop into the core and play. So a lot of the work, I got to give D0pefish credit to here real quick. I had the idea of being able to update the DOS VHD from the MiSTer side, right? So it was going to be a two-step process. So one script that kind of used MiSTer FS to mount the a folder and then pull any changes in, and then a DOS script that ran to update those changes. And D0pe dropped in like randomly and said, "Hey, I wrote this Linux script for you. It does basically everything you want. Here you go." And it mounts all the VHDs for you, pulls down from GitHub, kind of the skeleton was there, but he pulled it together for me. So hats off to him for helping me, bridge that gap. So that same gap can be used to basically anything that is sourced on, like Mod Archive, where there's music out there and you wanted to get it all the way into DOS. We can do that now with a MiSTer script. So it's really cool.
That's amazing. That's amazing and a lot of work.
It is, yeah. A passion project, right? It's fun. And it's exciting because I didn't get into the mod music scene at all, really, kind of growing up. Because again, that was definitely on the Amiga side, and I wasn't into that. And the DOS side, you had some of it in the BBSs, but not really, not as much as kind of more of the games and the door games and things like that. So
yeah, this kind of happened after the fact, right?
Right.
Like 10 or 15 years after.
Yeah, and including now, right? You've got that entire huge mod scene. You've got musicians still using all these old systems to generate it, and there's new music out there that you can play, that you could play on the MiSTer now. So it'll be fun. It's fun for me to go in and kind of curate those things and make it available to people that just don't have exposure to it, and kind of just using the platform to expose people to new things.
That's awesome. And talking about that, which are your favorite MT32 tracks of games? Well, not the tracks, games that are probably not Monkey Island 1. You can say Monkey Island 2, that because we already established that's the only thing you need. But what if somebody... No, I'm not going to say if somebody grows tired. I'm going to say if somebody wants to check inferior music on the platform, what would they select?
D0pefish, you go first.
Sure. Yeah, my PC game experience from the MT32 era is very limited, to be completely honest with you, because it was just enough before my time.
Yeah, and you're way younger than us, right?
A little bit, maybe.
Well, not way. Yes, a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sort of an aging millennial. But I would, from playing through some of the games in Flynn's pack that work with MT32, and being aggressively told by my friends that I must play Dune.
Dude.
Okay, yeah.
I've listened to the Dune soundtrack, and it's just gorgeous. So I'll go with that.
That one without the proper sysx commands is destroyed. But it's an amazing soundtrack, that one.
Yeah, that's probably that's the one where I think it definitely flexes the hardware and how creative people can be on it. Any of the Sierra games, really well done. A lot of effort went into creating those. It doesn't just sound like somebody's sitting behind a keyboard, banging it out into MIDI and then it just plays as the soundtrack. It really feels like, there's a lot of effort into those. So those are the ones that I go back to. Doom is fun. Again, you're getting into the general MIDI and SC50, sound canvas side of things. But I have really enjoyed the flexibility. We haven't really talked about it a lot. So you've got on the MT32 Pi, you've got the MT32 ROMs and kind of the 3 or 4 different versions of the ROMs there for your choosing. And then on the sound canvas side, you got all these SC2 files, right? And those are, they can be very different. And so when we first got this set up and using the pack and being able to switch the sound fonts very quickly, I had a blast going through and playing games like Doom. Oh, Descent is a huge one in there. Descent and Descent 2.
Oh yeah.
Great soundtracks in those. I could listen to those all day. So, and I grew up, I played Descent probably more than any game, to be perfectly honest. That was one where we got into LAN parties. We were in our offices all connected, 10 base T, and right after work at 5 o'clock, everybody's playing Descent. So,
And have you tried Sylphid?
I haven't, no.
Me neither.
It's the MT32 version of an originally FM soundtrack on the 2608 for PC-88, but it's really good. It's really good. It was brought to the States by Sierra.
Oh, nice.
And go and give it the intro music is really good.
I don't think that's in the top 300, so I'm gonna have to I'll probably hear about that.
Oh, okay. I'm sending you the
I'll put it in the 500 pack.
I'm sending you the MIDI file right now.
All right.
Awesome.
I already sent you my rip of Akumaju for X68000. It has the first C6 commands in a separate MIDI file.
That's cool.
So I already sent you those for you. Those were captured from a real X68000 via an M-Audio interface for a MIDI.
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check those out afterwards.
Yeah, those are my. And then I think it's Falcon 3.0 is a good one as well. Again, that's a fighter game. I liked all the flight sims and things like that, and that one's got a good soundtrack. Those are my standouts.
Oh, they mentioned that Sorcerian. Mr. Warriors says that Sorcerian has MT32 support. I'm really interested in that because that's Yuzo Koshiro's music ported to MT32.
That's cool.
Okay.
Nice. There was one that we haven't mentioned, I think, Tyrion, which not MT32, but General MIDI, I think. Someone, so I did a live stream at one point where I was kind of, we just kind of finished doing the integration stuff, and I was really excited to show people, so I did a random impromptu live stream on Twitch, and it was so unplanned that I was just sort of fumbling around on the MiSTer, just not sure what on earth to try and play. And someone in the chat, my friend Brendan, he's actually a video game musician, he just said, "Play Tyrion now, just play Tyrion, and go into the jukebox section. Don't even bother with the game." Yep. Yeah, it has its actual own jukebox where it has the soundtrack, but also when I started it up, I was just shocked because the whole screen turned into this visualization as well. Because it's not just a player; it actually turned into a. It was almost like one of those Winamp visualizations when you listen to the music and all these stars are flying around, and that sounded amazing. I was only just using the default sound font that I include with MT32 pipes is General User GS, so I can only imagine what it sounds like on some of the SC55 fonts, but yeah, it sounded good.
It's funny you bring that one up. So the MIDI pack I'm building, I went in, and you can actually launch that jukebox from the command prompt using Tyrion's executable. So I've got that set up where you can kick off that jukebox in full screen for the MIDI pack, specifically for that purpose, just because it has such good music. And it's got a cool, again, it's a jukebox interface, which is fun.
That's great. Yeah, it's obviously good enough such that it deserves its own menu item in your pack. So yeah, if that gives the audience a feel for how blown away I was when I first heard it, yeah.
Yeah, you also have, like, obviously all the LucasArts games like Indiana Jones and Loom, and Willy Beamish also supports MT32, right?
Yeah, I mean, all of those are good. So the Star Wars games, like any of the Lucasfilm stuff is good too. I mean, when you think about X-Wing and all of them, X-Wing, B-Wing, X-Wing versus, all of those support MIDI, and they really sound really good. I was trying to find my list of games that are in I've got the main check-in that I did, and I'm just trying to find it. I'll paste that in.
And what would you recommend people that want to get into this setup? Is what would be the way to enter this the most friendly way? What that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to come out with it. So there's an archive.org pack that, kind of is the base of this. It was curated from archive.org content. So, you basically start with the base setup, which is the BIOS files that you need for. So in a folder on your MiSTer, either on USB on the network or on the SD card, you need games AO46. And then underneath that, you need a couple of ROM files. Those are the video ROM and the normal BIOS ROM. And then you need, for my packs, I broke out the OS. So DOS is in its own hard drive so that if we wanted to swap those out, it's kind of separate from the games. And so you need the main, basically C volume, which is where the DOS OS is, and then the secondary part of that is the second VHD, which is where all the games and utilities and things like that. And then there's a CD folder for all the CD games. The MiSTer Core will automatically mount the CDs for you, and again, that's all scripted, so you don't, as a end user, you don't have to worry about any of that. It'll just, if you're using the pack and you're using the front end, it'll automatically mount all those CDs for you and just play the game. And so everything is self-contained. It's as close as we could get it to basically downloading a ROM, like if you were going to download an arcade ROM, very much like that. It's just you've got a secondary interface that gives you all the list of games. And then if you set up your MT32Pi exactly the way that D0pefish's README explains it, then you're off to the races. It's click and run.
That's really amazing, because that's that kind of simplification takes an enormous amount of effort, and we thank you for doing that, guys. And I want to say that archive.org is an invaluable resource for this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's where you think about, even on a real machine, or resources that you need. If you were going to build up a 386 or 486, again, I'm a collector, so I've got an IBM PC Junior, a 286, 386, 486, real hardware. And if you need the drivers, or you need some old piece of an operating system, it's out on archive.org. And if it's not there, it's on Vogons. And if it's not there, it doesn't exist. So that's really, I spend a lot of my time on searching for a specific driver for this specific sound blaster, or the things that are included in the pack, to find just the perfect version that fits into the guardrails that we have, and to get that working. So invaluable resource.
Yeah, shout out to Jason Scott and all the archive.org team. If you guys don't know what that is, it's an incredible archive that does several things. One of them is like index every website that it can, and timestamp it, and keep the different versions in time, and also does this incredible archive of PDFs and executables and binaries, and it's an invaluable resource. Go check it out if you don't know it.
I think my favorite thing about archive.org is the fact that it saved my own website from being lost, because I forgot to take a backup ages ago. And also the Amiga magazines that I talked about right at the beginning of this session are all on there. So I can just go on archive.org at any time and just look through those magazines from the 90s all over again. It's just incredible.
Yeah, there's so much information there, and it's an invaluable resource. They do accept donations, so if anyone is inclined to do that, they probably can make good use of that. And right now, do you spend any time gaming? And if so, on which platforms? How about you, D0pefish?
It's pretty sad and ironic that I don't actually spend much time gaming on the MiSTer or any of my retro platforms, because I do have quite a lot of real hardware.
It's not sad. I'm asking this because we probably will get the same answer from everybody. But please go on.
I had a feeling that might be the case. Yeah. I don't know what it is. I think it might be a programmer, techie person type thing. We like to just get things working, and then then that's it. The challenge is over. We move on to something else. Like the game itself doesn't end up mattering. But there is one game that I always keep playing, which is Overwatch on PC. I just love that game. I've always loved first-person shooters on PC, and I have this group of friends that I play with every weekend, and it's like my thing that I do every Friday, Saturday, especially throughout this pandemic. It's like one of the few ways of being able to socialize. So I do really enjoy playing that. It's not in like an overly competitive way, because you can play these sorts of games very competitively and seriously. We just have a few drinks and play casually, and that's good enough for me. But
yeah, it's like having a phone call, but without the awkward silences, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Silence just means you're actually playing the game, and that's fine too.
Yeah, it kind of bonds that way.
Yes.
That's good. And how about you, Flynnsbit?
Yeah, I'm a bit of the same. Again, I talked about it earlier. I'm a tinkerer, and so that challenge of doing something that not a whole lot of people are doing. So I spend a lot of time on that, including, like I'm an arcade collector, pinball collector. And so I enjoy fixing a lot more than I enjoy playing, but I do play. Obviously, based on my tag, I love anything and everything Tron. So I've got Tron, Discs of Tron, and the Tron Legacy Pinball, and I play those a lot. And
Discs of
I
Tron.
do have an environmental Disc of Tron and did a full restore on it. Lots and lots of fun.
I love that machine. Yeah.
That one's hard because it's the full environmental, and so getting the artwork and doing the full repair and all those, that I got tons of enjoyment out of that. From a gaming perspective, in today's gaming, I play Destiny 2. It's the only game I play that's on my Xboxes and PC, depending on where I'm sitting. So it's literally the only kind of next gen game I play. And then I find myself either, and again, the rest of it's going to be DOS. It's going to be those old school games. And it'll either be something I saw on YouTube. So there's some great YouTube channels that kind of focus on those things, and somebody's sitting there playing, and I go play it. The other thing is when I'm doing these packs, and I'm going in and I'm testing games, I'll find myself playing for an hour, and I'm supposed to be testing and fixing and checking in GitHub code and moving on. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is fun. And then an hour goes by and I'm like, I've been sitting there playing Arkanoid or Prince of Persia, or, in some of the games, some of the bugs that people send, I made a joke about it, I think this week. It's like, can't remember which game it was. There's a couple of different games. I think even Monkey Island had a bug in it. And it was like, get to this point in Monkey Island. And it was like an hour in. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to play this an hour so I can find where to. Now, it's great, but I'm sitting there trying to get to the bug and spending my time sitting there playing Monkey Island. I know that was one of them. But there's a few of those where those bugs don't manifest themselves. It's not like 5 minutes into the game or, right after the launch screen, so I end up playing them. But I enjoy just the quirky ones that are in there where somebody says something and I'll play it for an hour.
And regarding the collection, have you found it useful to have the real hardware side by side and compare it with...
Invaluable, right? Because the packs that I create are actually almost compatible with a real PC. Because of the MiSTer and how close it is from an accuracy perspective. I say accuracy, 486s in that whole era, they weren't accurate, right? It was all over the place. But the way that you interact with DOS and the setup that it has, it's very, very similar. And so you can take almost that exact same pack, make an image, make a FAT32 image, throw it on a real machine. That's going to boot up exactly like it does on the MiSTer. there's basically two things that are different. Number one is the auto seeding mounting. You don't have that ability. So I literally go burn a CD for whatever game I'm trying to play. And then I use, a virtual version of mounting that CD where I actually eject so I changed the script in the pack to say, instead of kicking off the MiSTer auto mount CD, all it does is run the eject command to open the eject tray on my 486. And then I drop the CD into the game. The front end plays exactly the same, all of those things. But it helps me identify problems that aren't core related problems. Because if you get a black screen over on a real 486 machine, then it's not the video BIOS or something MiSTer related. It's something config related. So I probably fixed 20 or 25 games in the pack, knowing that it did the exact same thing on a real piece of hardware. And it was real easy to take that image, take it from the MiSTer and put it on a real PC and, kind of jump between a 286, a 386, and a 486.
It fills me with joy to hear that, because that's kind of needed in the world right now. More people that can and are willing to do that kind of job of comparing and using their collections, because collectors these days, many don't understand that preservation is the only way for their own hardware to run in the future.
I've been talking to the Exodus converter developer. He's the one that's helped me add all of these MiSTer features, and having a real hardware option in it so that you could pick real hardware, and these small changes that you have to make now to get the same Exodus that came from DOSBox that is ultimately emulating old hardware, and get that same collection with a really nice interface and memory swappers and all that back over on real hardware. So it's something that's on the list that would, it helps me in troubleshooting, being able to drop back and test it. But then I like playing on real hardware just as much as I like playing on MiSTer.
Yeah, and also helps for the future, because I believe firmly that if we have the systems running now, it's our kind of not an obligation, but a responsibility to try and verify that behavior is the same, and document that, because sometimes the work is put forward without saying that this was verified on original hardware, right? And that it matches, and that is valuable by itself, because it could be a reference for the future.
Yeah, I just don't want to look like an idiot. When I post a GitHub issue, I better have found exactly, here's the testing platform, here's what I went through to get there. Because if I didn't and I just posted it out there, for D0pefish, for an example, when I was going through and testing that LCD, I wanted to make sure it wasn't me, because again, I'm not the best solderer. You've all seen me solder if you've watched any of my videos, but it's just making sure that I've validated that it's not me, and then outline what I've gone through to get to the point where I think it's a bug. So I hope more people do that.
Yeah, that being a tester is a really difficult task in that sense, because it's you have to repeat the process several times and verify it. It's not an easy. I mean, it's a pain in the head for everybody that's trying to fix the bugs. So you have to try and remove as much load from them, right? Because they have to understand what's going on and fix it, and not chase a red herring, right? Speaking about Monkey Island. And what do you see in the future for your projects?
Yeah, on my side, I've got four big kind of time-consuming projects. The first one is the MIDI pack that we talked about. Again, very music-centric, plug and play, drop it in there and play all the mod scene, DOS music. The second one that probably most people know about is the top 500. So taking all the lessons learned from the top 300 and expanding that collection to a full top 500 game list, community driven. So there's a GitHub repo link where people have been adding their own games, and we definitely got up to 500. The goal of that one is every single game in that pack works and is functional for the period and is functional and playable in the AO486 core. So anything that's Pentium era, like Quake, those are going to get dropped out. And anything that might run into the few bugs that we still have left in the core, I'll drop those out. But to make sure that everything is tested, 500 games in the collection, fully sourced by the community. So that's number 2. Number 3 is a shareware pack. It's got 100 games in it. It's all shareware. And again, back to my BBS days, the way we shared games was shareware. It's, freely available and open. It might be the first 3 levels, but it gave you the ability to experience those games, especially with limited bandwidth back in the day, 2400 baud modem. You really only wanted the first couple of levels. And so 2 points there is, number 1, a sourced pack that is very, very small. So I'm trying to keep it under 1 gig. Same launcher interface, maybe a new launcher interface if we can get it done. And then fully distributable. So it doesn't have MS-DOS in it. It's FreeDOS. It's at 100% open source and or shareware games, so that there's no risk. And if people wanted to share it, go to town, and it's got 100 DOS games that are fully playable. And last but not least is there was a foundational issue with the original Top 300 and the way we generated folder name structure. It was auto-generated, and if you picked 5, let's say you picked 4 King's Quest games and somebody created their own pack and I picked 5 King's Quest games, those folders could be different. And if you do that, then it's impossible to have a GitHub repo that fixes, config issues and INI. So we've standardized on that now. So every single game has the exact same static folder name, allowing us to centralize the GitHub fixes for those. So no matter anybody that creates a pack, if you go out and generate your own pack of your favorite games, but there's changes that we've found or I've found to fix those specific games, you can basically go run one MiSTer script and update your own pack, fix those games, and you're off to the races. So that one's been a bigger challenge than I thought. But again,
it sounds like a huge challenge. I can see how it looked small.
It was, again, it's like, I can get that done in a week. I'm a couple of months, 3 months into that now. So, but those are mine. Those are my 4 big ones.
That's a handful. you have quite enough for.
I joked about it. I'm gonna retire after those.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel the same with. I feel that I'll die before ending MD4E on all the platforms I want it running.
How about you, Dope?
And yeah.
First, I'm just I'm trying not to laugh because of the people trying to get me to say things with my accent in the chat. I will. I've got to say, like you were criticizing your own soldering in that video that you made, Flynn. To be honest, you did such a good job on that video that I keep seeing that video popping up in places I don't expect it to. So, people keep linking to that video saying, hey, just follow this guy. He shows you how to make an MT32 Pi. You don't need to buy one. Look at this guy. So it's like, I think he did a good job with the soldering. I don't know how I can try and segue from soldering to routers, but hey, there you go. I said it.
Or aluminum. Can you, what is that metal?
Oh, that's aluminium. The aluminium Raspberry Pi case.
There it is.
Yeah.
And in Spanish we say aluminio, so I'm on that side too.
Yeah. But yeah, to answer your question, the stuff I'm working on at the moment is mainly the networking stuff. So that's more or less done now for this release. Although I'm trying to work up the motivation to sit down and write an FTP server, because it would be really good if we could just use the networking features of the Pi to just get in and be able to write new sound fonts in there or change the config without having to touch the SD card. and also that would allow a MiSTer update script to work as well. So if the Pi was on the network, the MiSTer could then talk to the Pi over the network and send it new updates from GitHub and stuff like that. So I would like to do that. There are obviously FTP is older than me, so there are a lot of libraries out there for doing FTP. But the problem is they are usually based around Linux sockets, BSD sockets, and porting them to Circle isn't quite like drop-in replacement kind of thing. So I will have to do some work for that, but I do want to do it because it would probably stop me from killing SD cards from swapping them so much, which would be a bonus. Apart from that, there is so Kitrinks has been working on this SC55 sound font, which is a tool that she's written that converts the original SC55 ROM into a sound font, literally just by analyzing all the data. And she's got this gigantic spreadsheet where she's worked out all of the different parameters of all the different instruments in the ROM. And it's gotten to the point where it's as good as it can be almost, without actually within the limitations of sound font, the standard. So now to get the rest of the SC55 features, we actually need to go and mod Fluid Synth and break out of the sound font standard. We need to actually make some extensions to it. So I'd like to try and help with that once I work my way through this list, which would get us so much closer to true SC55.
Super excited about that one. Yeah, that would be really cool. It's already so far, and it's already awesome, but taking that to the next level.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. A lot of work, and she does amazing work. And you combined, I can't imagine what will come out of it. So thank you guys for doing that. And when you were talking about this, you got me thinking into what about MIDI synths that take two MIDI inputs, like the C88 Pro?
Yeah, I have thought of that, because when I got my own SC88 Pro, I thought, what like how much of this could work on Fluid Synth? And I think the way it would have to work is probably two instances of Fluid Synth or something. I haven't really thought about that specific feature too much, but there are some things that have already been done. So, for example, the 88 can let you remap any channel to be an additional drum channel. So you can have more than just channel 10 as the drum channel. And some songs definitely do use that. So when I noticed one of these MIDIs playing a random piano instead of a triangle, so like all the way through the song, there's just this din, din, din noise. I thought there's something wrong here. I don't know what that is. I don't know why it's making that noise. And it turned out it's because it was an SC88 MIDI, and there was some sysex at the start that's supposed to set channel 9 or something into an additional drum channel. So I implemented that in MT32Pi, and then a few months later, someone implemented that in Fluid Synth. So it's now part of Fluid Synth, and I can remove that from MT32Pi. It's now part of the actual synth itself rather than my front end. And there's a couple of other things to do with the SC88 and the GS specific MIDI stuff that you can do that's starting to make it into Fluid Synth. I think more people are realizing that Fluid Synth is being used in place of these synths, so it should try and support some of these extra features. So that's something that's kind of being worked on, if not by myself, then by other people in the general Fluid Synth project, which is pretty cool.
No, that's quite a lot of things. So, is there anything else you want to talk about?
I'm curious. Have you had anybody use the MT32 Pi in an unexpected way? I know you can connect it to instruments too, right? Like, and have people, done something that you didn't expect that just worked?
Yes. I've seen, I think it was SuperJuice from this server who ripped out the contents of, ripped out all the electronics from this Casio keyboard because they thought the keyboard's electronics sounded terrible, and replaced it with MT32 Pi. So now he's got this Casio keyboard with MT32 Pi as the sound generator, which amazing. I thought was amazing. Yeah, and there's been so what I do every now and again is I go on YouTube and I search for MT32 Pi and I sort from most recent videos and uploads, and sometimes I just get blown away by what I see. There's people in Korea, in South Korea, that have got this MiSTer community, and they've opened up this MT32 Pi section. So I have to stumble through all of this through Google Translate. But they've got they've got these huge group orders going on, and people showing videos of all these games I've never even heard of and I can't even understand or read because it's all in Korean and stuff, playing on MT32 Pi. And it just blows my mind that people around the world are using this thing, and it's crazy to me. I see people building them into really interesting cases. So there's a Vogons thread about show us your custom MT32 Pi builds, and you've got everything from 3D printed mini MT32s, which is one of the most obvious ideas, but it's done so well by quite a lot of people, to people saying, hey, I had this random television set-top box and it was taking up space in my garage, so I ripped out the contents and I've turned that into an MT32 Pi. I've seen someone build one out of Lego. I've seen people yeah, I've seen people doing live music sessions, live jams with MT32 Pi in their stack of gear. It's just ridiculous. I can't even begin to encapsulate what seeing all of this makes me feel, because to me it's just me messing around with a Raspberry Pi. It's just crazy how creative people are given the chance to mess around with this. So I love that,
because you could also just plug it into your cell phone, right, through a MIDI port and a USB MIDI port and USB on the go, and play with it.
Yeah, you can, and you can. The networking stuff I've been playing with, you can use apps on Android to connect to it that way, and that works as well. So you can play the MT32 Pi with your phone. All of this stuff, it might seem pointless, but someone somewhere will find an amazing use for this, and you just leave it to them. And I just write the code. I don't know how to use it in these crazy ways. I'll let other people work that out. But yeah, I really enjoy seeing that.
I love that Vogons thread.
That's
I posted that in the chat. It's awesome to go through and see all the creativity there. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. And those Korean things now, so those Korean games that are known to us, then you'll probably have a lot of work with that, Flynnsbit.
Yeah, I'm gonna need a translator sitting next to me.
Imagine dealing with Korean setups of drivers and
there's a version of me in Korea that has already built some other interface and all the DOS scripts and everything needed. It's just all in Korean. I don't know if that exists, but I'm sure.
Hopefully that exists, because there's so much things that we missed out, and maybe there's amazing music there as well.
It's kind of like the Japanese culture, right? We missed out on, at least I did, on some amazing games, and again, not MIDI specific, but again, TurboGrafx, and we talked a little bit about the collecting there, and all the PC Engine stuff, and just the difference in game titles and what we have available over there, was a new world for me when I started collecting.
Yeah, it's like we lost 1/3 of the 16-bit generation, right?
Yeah, we just didn't know about it. Now we have access to it, so it's really neat.
Yeah, there's so much, and the PC-88 and PC-98 are platforms that have a ton of games, and how everything played together with DOS gaming, and there was some cross-pollination across nations, and different threads that ended up being like Zelda or Dragon Quest that were spawned by stuff in the US, right, or in Europe, and how everything slowly changed across the world. But thanks to platforms like MiSTer, we now have access to these amazing implementations and your work that makes it accessible to people. So thank you again.
It's fun, and again, I get something out of it too. So it's the tinkering and the doing something that doesn't exist. So a lot of fun.
Likewise, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that's all the themes that I wanted to cover. I don't know if there's something else that we should talk about. I mean, we could keep on talking about arcade platforms and the Archimedes and the Acorn and the Spectrum and the Amiga and floppies and PCB repairs. But I believe that it's quite late for you, D0pefish, there, and we covered the main themes. So how do you feel? Should we go on, or are we done here?
I'm happy to go on if you can give me like a 2-minute break to go and grab another beer. But
that's cool.
I'm good to keep going
sure.
for a little bit. Obviously, it's only 10:30 for me on a Friday, so I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good too. I have to be on a show later on, like in an hour, but I can be like here another hour without an issue.
I don't think we should do that.
But yeah, sure.
But let's let him get his beer and.
Yeah, I don't think
go
so.
For it.
That other show takes 5 hours, so it's gonna be a long day for me. Yeah,
oh, man. All right, well.
Yeah, but I'm okay. Don't worry about it. So go for that.
Yeah,
beer.
I'll be right back.
Meanwhile, we can talk about arcade PCVs and your experience, man.
Yeah, so I started collecting arcades in about 99. My first machine was actually a MAME machine that I built from the ground up, and made the 1,000 mistakes that people make. I threw an X Arcade stick as the control panel, and then realized that I didn't want that and that it was crap, and so then I built my own control panel. And then you get into the rabbit hole of wanting all the controls, so spinner control, 4-way control, 8-way control, obviously the trackball. And then that really sparked me going back to, so we had a huge arcade scene in, when I was growing up. That was kind of the other side. So if I wasn't at home messing with my BBS, I was at the arcade, right? That was where you were. And the ones that always stood out for me was obviously Tron and anything that had either custom controls or something unique about the video. So I'm a big vector collector, and I repair all my vector monitors. And so I've got Asteroids Deluxe, Star Wars, and Tempest. Those are my 3 vectors that I spend too much time repairing.
I'm so afraid of going into that, and I know that I won't go into that because maintaining vector scope, I keep my regular CRTs as well as I can, but vector scopes that vector displays, that really scares me, and I bet it would be impossible for me to get them.
Yeah, so the problem is that it's just so hard to find, right? These days, again, just like PCs or consoles or anything else, there was an era where they were nothing. And so I lucked out, number one, because I was in a point in my life where I knew I wanted to collect some. And so, arcades were dead. There were no barcades. Of course, there was no MiSTer. There was...
Yeah, you're talking 2000 to 2010.
Yeah, exactly. You just
right?
didn't... Hey, it was either... And MAME, for vectors and or those custom controlled
Mhm.
games like Tron were crap. Like it's not the same experience at all. And so I started going to arcade auctions, and you could get them for nothing. You know, and when I say nothing, like literally $50 for a working cabinet, you know, working
That's
internals.
amazing. Yeah.
My Asteroids Deluxe, I think I paid $50 plus whatever the arcade fees were. And
For people that don't know what we are talking about, vector displays are CRTs that can plot not in a raster. That is, when you have a regular CRT, it's drawn from the top to the bottom and from left to right, each line at a time. And the vector displays can draw any shape on the screen and have very different intensities. So you have very deep blacks against very, very bright and well-defined lines.
yeah, it's point-to-point
looks
lines.
amazing.
And like and we've got
Yeah.
the Vectrix console that does that. And then, of course, any oscilloscope is basically doing that.
Yeah, I love my scopes. Yeah.
So it was intimidating at first. And then, you know, again, if you've got that tinker spirit, like I'm going to dive in, and this is broken. I can't make it any worse. So, you know, that's how I started the process of, you know, and of course, usually it really is, everybody says do a cap kit, but, you know, it usually is the capacitors that go out on any of the stuff, including even if you're doing a motherboard repair, like on a 286 or a 386, it's going to be the capacitors most likely.
And the power supply,
yeah,
for sure.
And then, you know, and then it's going to be battery damage. Those are usually the, you know, everything that you spend your time repairing. So
It's impressive how resilient this old hardware is, right?
well, and it's so much easier to work on. Those boards are huge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, I joke about my soldering skills, but like on those, you could solder with a spoon and do okay.
Yeah, but please use proper tools, because
Yeah.
it's very easy to
Destroy
to
it.
destroy a
Yeah, of
PCB.
course.
Yeah, an arcade PCB, you are soldering on like IRM or Konami pads, and you can blow them easily
Very.
if you are not controlling your temperature.
Yeah. So that's how I got, in fact, that's how I got into a lot of my kind of hands-on skills, soldering irons and things like that, was just being forced into it as a arcade collector. So you got to have the room for it.
That's
I
amazing.
replaced it with, I was a server collector, you know, I was in IT. And so I would get hand-me-down
So-
servers, and I'd have I had a server room at the house. And of course my wife,
You had Deck Alpha
Yeah.
there?
yeah.
Yeah, lovely machines. And oh boy.
And then my
That's a
wife was
whole
like,
other
you got to
whole-
stop collecting these huge things. You know, we don't have any more closets. And I switched to arcades. So it didn't quite.
Oh yeah, that's easier.
yeah. Didn't quite go the same direction. Anyway,
no.
she's excited about the MiSTer, because I'm slowly selling off some of my collection, because it truly is replacing, you know.
Yeah, that small box replaces
Sure
all
does.
those big boxes.
Yeah.
Good. And you are into classic computers, right, D0pefish?
Yeah, that's right. I have a fairly decent Amiga collection. So one of my most prized computers is an Amiga 4000, and it has all the most rare and expensive add-ons you can think of. It's crazy. So I didn't pay much for these back when I got them, but now you look at the eBay prices and it's terrifying. Like maybe if I need to, you know, buy a house or something, I've got a good deposit right there in that Amiga 4000. It's ridiculous.
Really? I have my Amiga 4000 next to me here on the floor, and it was a gift from a dear friend. We used to play this when we were younger, and he simply moved on and said, I'm done with Winua. The emulator is good for me. You can have it. So
I think a lot of Amiga people are like that. They just give each other bits and pieces. When the hardware stays within the community, it's quite nice as well.
yeah.
But I'm quite lucky. I've got in my Amiga 4000, I've got this Cyberstorm 060 with the Power PC. So that was when they tried to kind of branch off of the 68K and add the PowerPC in to give the machine a new lease of life and run more modern programs in the mid 90s. And it also has this thing called the G-Rex. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's a card.
No.
Yeah, it's a card that replaces the Zorro slots in the Amiga 4000, and because on the Amiga 4000 you've got these slots, and it's kind of split in half. Like one half is the actual Zorro slots that are Amiga native card slots, and just next to them you've got all these empty ISA slots, which are literally the same as PC ISA slots. But to use those, you usually have to install a bridge board, which would give you half a PC on a card, like a 486 PC on a card. And then you could use those slots to put graphics cards, sound cards for the PC side in. But if you don't use those, you could get this thing called a G-Rex, and it would give you PCI cards for the Amiga. So you had the ability to plug in like a Voodoo 3 to the Amiga, and a Sound Blaster Live and a network card and everything. And it really sort of turned the old Amiga into like an almost modern PC, like in terms of like late 90s spec. And yeah, I have one of those. It's quite weird playing Quake 2 in 3D on an Amiga, but it is possible. And like you do it once and you're like, wow, this is crazy, but then you realize that playing Quake 2 is just so much better even on a Raspberry Pi these days. So it's all kind of academic really, but yeah, it's an interesting machine.
But it's fun, yeah.
So how does that compare? So the speed of that, what is it? Is it the Vampire, the FPGA based one? From a speed perspective compared to what you have there, Dope?
I'm going to guess that the Vampire is probably faster. I don't know that much about the Vampires. I don't have one, but I think they kind of did it in a kind of inside out way, where the Vampire is doing everything and the Amiga is just sort of like being a little board to put it on. It's a really interesting project, and they've done some crazy work with it. I think they've like invented their own set of extra CPU instructions for it and everything. They've created this 68080 in quotes, I think. I don't know much about it though. It's meant to be very, very fast though. It's that's pretty crazy.
Everything I see is just, it's all about speed. So I was just curious about that. I don't own a single Amiga, so I went out and looked today, and I think I saw it was like the 600s on eBay were like, it was over $600. I'm like, okay, nope. I'm out. Something that doesn't say non-working. I blame all the YouTubers and everybody who posts original hardware, like Phil's Labs. Like anytime he posts a video, I mean, I think that's where the prices of Voodoo cards went up. Like anything that he posts, if you didn't get to it before he posts it, the price skyrockets.
Yeah, it gets aggravated by that kind of thing. But in reality, there's also the fact that this stuff is old.
There's not a whole lot of it.
There's not a lot of it. And besides that, the people that want it have the economic power to get it. So
right. Yeah, you've got people who grew up with it, didn't have any money. I was thinking about when D0pefish was going through his MIDI stack of the real hardware that he had, you named at least 3 devices. And I was thinking, okay, what would that have cost in, 1990 when it came out? Back yourself up.
No, impossible.
Yeah, for sure.
And today, because most probably D0pefish got them as I did years ago, and they were really cheap. As opposed to today, I remember paying like $45 for my MT32.
That's impossible these days. I mean, you can get it with the MT32 Pi now. It probably cost you about $40, and that's good. But don't try and get a real one. It's not worth it.
Yeah, and it's like 3 years of difference, right? For that price escalation.
For some reason, I think again the pandemic caused people sitting at home like me and everybody else probably listening to this. They're like, okay, I want to do that thing that I wanted to do back then, and I have a little, I'm sitting around, so I'm going to collect arcades, or I'm going to build up a MiSTer. I'm going to build up a new 486, from the ground up, and you'd probably spend a little more money on that than you used to. Even PC parts, right? Like I built my PC. I luckily built kind of right before the pandemic. And what's funny about it is what drove me to build this was I was generating the top 300 packs, and it was taking like an hour just from a disk and processor perspective to build those packs. And I was like, I could save so much more time if I just built a machine. So I did, and I got it right at the tail end. And of course, now I would suggest no one buy any hardware. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it went crazy, completely crazy. Just as you say, during the pandemic, it went worse.
I think you got a lot of collectors sitting out there going, I'm going to buy an MT32 or something. Anyway,
I've had people come and tell me, hey, this MT32 Pi thing's pretty cool. Like, I actually went and sold my real MT32 because it's just taking up room and I needed the cash, and this is fine as a replacement. And I was just like, okay then, like that's good, I suppose. So I don't know, maybe there's a few more MT32s on eBay now than there were before this existed.
Yeah, but it also brings it to the back of the people's minds. It happened with everything, right? When the mini consoles for like the NES, the NES came out, people thought that they would be, but when it just sells, people buy it. So it kind of balances out because there's people looking, like when we change console generations and prices for the old console go down, and you can buy a lot of good games for very cheap when the generation changes. Well, it used to be that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
I sold off some of my more obscure consoles again because of MiSTer. It's completely playable and in a better video format, and just better all the way around. So like my Neo Geo AES, that went out the door as soon as I figured out that it was just much more convenient and really accurate. So I still collect a few, but yeah, things like that have definitely driven down the hardware collection.
That's good. It's wise thing to do. I've not done it because you end up justifying things like, no, I need this 10 Super NES consoles because I need to measure them for every single case that pops up, right?
Yeah, in that particular instance, you need it as a comparison, but
yeah, but you don't need it. You say you do.
I don't need my arcade machines anymore, but I'm definitely not getting rid of them.
Yeah, I can understand that part as well. These are part of me, and they are taking them off my cold
right,
pants,
exactly.
Right?
Those are bolted.
The arcade is so much fun and so much work.
So I saw the chat earlier. I am all in on a MiSTer BBS. I'm going to definitely add that to my list because, again, I was an operator. I had 2 lines for 10 years. So I think that would be a lot of fun to have a MiSTer based, even have it built into the pack where you could hit one button and be on the MiSTer BBS. So that would be a lot of fun.
Sentient says that she wants to be the co-host.
Hey, there, I'm in. Yeah. It'd be so much fun. Hosted on a MiSTer, even, right? No reason that can't happen. So,
yeah, serial ports and modems.
Be pretty energy efficient as well. So it wouldn't cost as much as a real.
Oh, a lot better than the machine that I would actually host it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine that. And D0pefish, I read on your site that you're doing a PhD in computer science and game technology. How's that going?
It's that's true. It's been a bit weird for the last year because it's very hard. I haven't been able to go into the university at all. And one of the things about doing something like a PhD is that you really rely on being able to talk to people and collaborate with people, because there are a lot of other researchers in my group that are doing similar things, and it's been very difficult to work without that going on. But yeah, I mean, basically what my work is we're trying to research ways to use the cloud for gaming in more efficient ways, because we've got all this new cloud technology, and there are things like Google Stadia and Microsoft Cloud and stuff that let you stream games over the internet. But a lot of the games that are running on these platforms, they don't actually utilize the cloud very efficiently. They're just the same game engines that are running on your local PC, but just video streamed over a network link. So they're still constrained by the same limitations of a single machine. So what my research is about is looking at ways to distribute physics engines over cloud instances. So if you could imagine a physics engine in a game, it could be any kind of game, like a big open world FPS, or anything with thousands of objects in it, and you can destroy these objects, and they can all bounce off each other or interact with each other. If you're running that simulation on a single machine, you're limited to the CPU power or the GPU power of that one machine. So if you can distribute that over several cloud instances and scale that up and down, then you'd be able to create much more vast environments in video games. And some work has been done with that. And what my work focuses on is the load balancing and the scaling part of that. So one of my colleagues actually did the implementation of a physics engine that can work over the network without any janky, latency related glitches.
But I was going to ask about that. How do you split? Because one of the biggest issues for parallelizing stuff is subdividing the things. So what is the paradigm that you are selecting for? You're like localizing physics to specific areas, or are you just separating layers of physics into different instances?
It's really simple at the moment. We're just doing spatial partitioning. So you're literally just splitting the world up into like a grid or into.
So it's locally. Okay.
Yeah. So it's geographical partitions, and then each server is assigned to manage a certain partition. But the magic is, so there is some stuff out there that does this. I think there are some like commercial solutions that do this. And they have overlapping boundaries where when the objects cross the boundary, they collide with each other over the network, and the collisions are done over the network. But when if you could imagine like a pyramid where there's loads of cubes stacked on top of each other, and the pyramid is sort of straddling the boundary, and then you just throw a huge object into the middle of that pyramid to try and break it up, you kind of see all these like weird artifacts where the objects are very unstable because of the network latency that's introduced into the simulation. So to avoid that, we've done it a different way where the boundaries don't overlap, and what happens instead is when objects get close to the boundary, you send like an area of influence, like an area bigger than the object, over the network, and if it's likely to hit something on the other side, then you move that object onto the other server, and it simulates it with its own objects together, so that you don't get any of the network latency being introduced there. It gets transferred instantaneously, and then that one server manages the collision. So it's almost as good as seamless.
That's impressive, because I would imagine that when you have shared memory and want to pass weight, I'm guessing that all these simultaneous processors have the same specs. Otherwise, it would be really hard, right? Like to synchronize the stuff and share the data between the two instances. But I'm guessing that you're sending minimal data when that happens, right? So it doesn't block the other processes that are running simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. So each server is its own independent simulation with its own time step and everything. So it could run on a slower or faster CPU. That doesn't really matter so much. And because the data we send is very, very minimal. It could
awesome.
vary depending on what the game wants to do. So maybe the game needs to attach more like metadata about the object with the object as it passes from one server to another. But it's still kind of early days of research, so we're not really considering that kind of thing yet. But what I'm focusing on is ways to dynamically scale the simulation. So it could start off with one server, and then as things get more, complex, it could get partitioned in real time, and then more
Yes.
Docker containers or servers could be spun up in the cloud, and then more simulations could be started and some of the workload shared. So it's quite a tricky problem. It's taken over my life, and I need to kind of balance this with with the MIDI, completely unrelated MIDI stuff that I've just happened to do.
Yeah. And from the outside, people think like you are taking a break from computers with computers, but it's so much different from the inside, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's got absolutely nothing to do with my day-to-day work. So it's like a whole different thing. Even if I am just switching desktops and changing what text editor I use,
It feels good. It feels good to just close those windows, right?
Yeah, I did an internship the other month, sorry, and it was literally end of the workday because of working remotely. It's just turn the VPN off and then open a different Firefox tab and do other stuff. It's been really strange
But it feels refreshing, right?
Yeah, it is refreshing when you can do that. And when you get off, I don't know if anyone else does this. When you get off a long Zoom call and you just sort of throw yourself back in your chair and you're like, oh God. Like I don't know if it's
and you just like move to the same screen, but it feels different because you are off that one.
Yeah, like I no longer have the headphones clamped to my head. I know people aren't listening to me now. I can chill out for a few minutes.
I'm just glad my hobbies don't intertwine with my real job. I couldn't do it if those mixed.
When the hobbies become work, you've destroyed them.
I spend all my day talking about, clouds and whether, our customers, where they're using them or not. So I don't want to do that when I get home.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do a cloud, MiSTer cloud that shares all?
No hosted Azure anything, please. No, I'd much rather host it on a MiSTer. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's good. That's good policy in general. And it's very good that we can have these kind of hobbies and a responsive community that encourages the results. It's very I don't know, it's refreshing. It's also uplifting to see your work being used, right?
Yeah, it's fun. Sometimes you go into this thinking, you're kind of, we always joked that there were, maybe 6 of us using the AO486 core total. There's dozens of us, right? That's kind of the joke, but seeing people enjoy it and, you start seeing more and more people interact and people are using it and having fun with it. So it's an escape for me. That's all the MiSTer cores. I love seeing the new cores drop. That's one thing that I absolutely do is I download the latest cores, whatever it is, pull down the images and anything that exists for it and just kind of play. I think it's so fun to see new things drop on there. I love that. And seems like it happens every week. So
yes,
it's an escape for me. It's fun.
But also some things look to be so daunting or huge, like the AO's 46, and your work makes it accessible, and that's amazing, because it takes off a huge impossible load. For imagine somebody that just downloads a core and then has to install from the operating system and install their stuff.
I think that's the difference, right? When there's another layer, right? Like if you're downloading, a TurboGrafx 16 ROM, you drop the ROM on there and there you are playing. When there's any of the computer cores, when there's an OS, you're relying on the internet or your past experience with those platforms to get it up to speed where people can enjoy it, because they are fun, but there's definitely a learning curve. So I even run into it today. I didn't grow up with like the Atari ST or again the Amiga, so dropping in there and kind of at least having a base to be able to play some of the fun games, it's a blast.
Yeah, you need some familiarity, right? You feel like your hands are tied,
right, with that extra
when you
layer.
change an OS. Yeah, but it's fun getting to learn how to deal with it. It's something that people that work in IT can relate to easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like myself, I know how to set up a 486 and do the DOS stuff and install all the drivers and change all my config sys and auto exec bat and everything. But sometimes you just want to play the games, and none of this matters. And Flynn's pack is there, and it just makes everything so much easier. And that's something I really appreciate, because I can't be bothered to do this kind of stuff anymore. I've done it a few times, and now I just want to try and get through some of these games in the very limited time I have. Yeah,
it's fun. Like the first times you do it, like I went through the same process with the X68000. I got mine like 6 years or 7 years ago, and it was fun building your own environment and having everything. But after that, you just want to clone that, right? And never deal with it again.
Yeah. I think we've got a few people agreeing with that in the chat as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm
reading. It's a labor of love, but it's fun. Just don't try and do 7,000. 300, 500. Those are much more reasonable. I was so completely out of it. Way too much gen. So I'm back. I got my feet on the ground again.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you think like on a weekend, right?
Exactly. I can record this. Let me just throw this together.
But it happens even with when making a YouTube video, as you have the experience. You think it's gonna be like 1 hour, and then
those take a day. And I'm a self-critic, and so I've joked about it in the Discord. I say a lot. It's my kind of my break. That's my thinking word. And it drives me crazy when I'm rewatching the videos before I post it.
Never watch yourself. I never.
I won't listen to this recording again, because I'll be counting the ums. And none of you that are listening, you better not count them. I don't want to know.
Yeah, that's something. I rather do live streams because of that, because I can't go and change the thing.
It's hours of work just to try and make it, a little bit professional. I don't care. I don't care how many subscribers. I'm just throwing it out there to try and help somebody who was going through the same challenges that I was, make it easier on them. That's the point. But, again, you're your worst critic usually.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps, but it could be your own enemy if you do that.
Right.
Yeah, I struggle sometimes with the perfect being the enemy of the good and everything. There's that saying, and sometimes I should really just release it. It's fine. Yep. It works.
Yes. That's how it ends up working, because there are some things that I just keep for months and I don't release, and then somebody asks for it and you release it in the state that it was because they need it, and you end up doing it like 6 months later, and didn't change it. So
Yeah.
because it wasn't perfect, and that's not good.
Well, and if I would have taken that approach with the top 300, that pack wouldn't be out still because there's still broken games in it. But having the ability to iterate on it was huge. And it's like, okay, there's going to be 56 games that are broken in the top 300 packs. So it's not really a top 300. But slowly working through those and being able to iterate on them has been good.
Yes, it's hard to draw that line, but whenever if somebody that's listening to this is struggling with that, just get it to a point where, I don't know, 70% is good for you. It's hard to put a number, but enough is, and you can iterate as we live in an era with where we can iterate, right? Not the best for when you're downloading game patches, but
right.
with this kind of thing, it's a must, right?
Well, and getting it in people's hands, I think both of our projects, both the packs and MT32Pi, before you kind of hand it to somebody, you don't know the way people are going to use it or what they're going to run into, and I'm sure D0pefish runs into the same thing. It's like, oh, right, yeah, that absolutely needs to be there, and would have never thought about it until somebody actually tried it. So.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, the best outstanding bug at the moment with MT32Pi is that it doesn't work at all on the 1 gigabyte Raspberry Pi 4. You know, the one that no one has, the one that no one wants, because it's the 1 gig. You've got to have the 2 or the 4 or the 8. You can't have the 1 gig. That's too
the cheap one.
That's the cheap one. So no one has that one. No one's tested that one. I haven't tested that one. And then eventually I got one and it doesn't work. So, so I've already fixed it, but no one's noticed. But now you know, so you probably will notice now. But,
I'd never be caught dead with a 1 gig Pi 4, so.
Yeah, it's basically a Raspberry Pi 3. I don't know what the point of that is.
Raspberries are amazing. I have a few here at home that I've used for several things. One is monitoring the doorbell, because we have like 2 doorbells, and I wanted my to be notified on the phone, because if I'm listening to music at high volume or playing, I want something to vibrate and listen. There's a doorbell, and I have one like doing a Fourier transform every 5 seconds and analyzing for each ringtone, and send it, and not send a message when the dishwasher is on or whatever, because they are similar in frequency response. So that prompted MD Fourier.
Wow.
Really.
Oh wow.
And because I had that code running right for years, I said it was like, okay, they want me to check how the system sounds if it's different. I think I can do that on a week. I'll do it right now. And well, you know that story. Another one, I have it controlling the arcade PCB storage room, and it has 2 of those humidity and temperature sensors, and I just hacked a 75 series TTL to turn on and off dehumidifier system.
Oh wow!
And log that to a database and plot the humidity and temperature for that room, so I don't bother, because it was a pain to just keep the PCBs in a good storage, and I didn't have the money, so Raspberry Pi it is. They're awesome.
You know, it keeps surprising me just how people use Raspberry Pi, because like within emulation communities, I've noticed there's a sort of sentiment of the Raspberry Pi now being the ugly stepchild of emulation, now that we've got FPGAs and fancy things, and we don't need Raspberry Pis to do emulation anymore. But what you've got to remember is that this is a computer that was meant to be for school kids, for education, right? And to be the cheapest possible thing that you could get, with a reasonable amount of CPU power and a reasonable amount of RAM, and it just does enough to be useful within its price range. and yet we've still managed to pull off some pretty crazy things with the Raspberry Pi that should never have been possible. So I don't know, like I see quite a lot of hate for the Raspberry Pi on Twitter, and I just do not understand it. It's like, wow, like you've got to remember this. It's meant to be a cheap computer. Like it's just okay at everything. It's not amazing at everything. It's just all right, you know. It's just
Yeah, but when you saw those magazines that packed a Raspberry Pi for the price of a magazine, that's you know, coming from being I studied university or college at during the 90s, and my dream was having a Linux PC that I could just store in my car instead of my car stereo and play those new MP3s, right? And well, that's available for $5 right now, right?
yeah.
It's impressive.
The price to processing power, it's still hard to beat. Even back when it
you know,
came out, it was, you know, and then the community that embraced it, you know, all the different Raspberry Pis, images. Like for me, I've got a Domotic server that's running on my home automation. That's on a Pi. My Ubiquity network routers and all that, it's on a Pi. So like it's so versatile because of the community and people creating all kinds of things. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, since it's so versatile, it's no wonder it ended up as an emulation box. I understand both sides of the story, because you can just like use an old PC and it will outpower the Raspberry Pi, right? But it's not like people know how to tinker with that. And Raspberry Pi is just like clone this SD card and you're done.
Yeah,
it's true.
So that's why it's popular. I understand that you could just like grab a 2010 computer and it'll beat the Raspberry Pi at emulation. In many case scenarios, not all of them, but
yeah.
But the thing is, who can rebuild a 2010 PC and set it up? It's way less people than the people that can just clone Raspberry Pi
and repair the battery damage that has occurred on the
motherboard. And change those capacitors on the power supply.
Or you can find a way to burn the CD to install the OS because your current PC doesn't have one, and you can't burn the CD.
Yeah, we have like the floppy interface for 5-inch discs here sitting on the desk and tons of CD drives, but that's not the common people, right?
Yeah, I think the best part about the Pi is not so much its spec or its price, but the fact that every single one of us, like listening, probably has one.
Yep.
There's probably one somewhere in your house, or maybe you owned one, or maybe you've just used one through other things.
A media server, whatever, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
An MT32, you know. Everyone on this should have one, right? It's sitting right next to their MiSTer.
It's funny. Some people are like, you know, I've upgraded to the MiSTer for emulation, so I've now I've upcycled my old Raspberry Pi as a sound card.
As the sidecar for the MiSTer. Yeah.
Yeah, I do quite like that. But the fact that it's so popular means that there's thousands of eyes on it, and it's well understood, and there are so many of them out there, and it's not going anywhere. You can, at least in the UK, you can walk down to the shop in the high street and get one if you want. It's so easy to get one. There are probably better things out there than the Raspberry Pi in the same form factor for a similar price. Like there's like these banana pies and things like that. But you just don't know who's making these things, and the community around the Raspberry Pi is so massive that you know that the software support is going to be there for a very long time. So I don't know, like for all its flaws, it's
standardized. And it's easy to find. It's just like Arduino. We chose Arduino when we made the CPS2, the Suicide project, because it was so cheap and easy to grab everywhere, right? Same as with the Pi.
Yeah. Yeah, and like a couple of people have mentioned in the chat, like you can find all sorts of different uses for older Pis. I've still got my original 2012 Pi, which is the very slow single core 700 megahertz thing, as a Pi hole, which is like a network level ad blocker, and it works. It works fine. I don't need anything more powerful than that. It does the job, and they're very, very cheap, especially second hand as well.
And if they die, you can substitute either the SD card or the Pi easily. Yeah.
And I know this because I've killed a few. A few Pis have died in the making of NT32 Pi because...
stop bridging the 5-volt rail on the GPIO.
Oh, man, I've done that twice now.
I have to.
Boy.
It's
too close.
So, yeah, for context, if anyone's listening and wondering what we're on about, the 3.3 volt pin is right next to the 5 volt pin, and if you short the 3.3 volt to the 5 volt because you're poking it with a multimeter or something, or you're trying to attach a wire and it slips or something like that, the Pi is now dead. That's it. It's over. Like instantly dead, and it will never boot up again. And you'll plug it in, and you'll get a light, but it'll not do anything. And I've done that twice, and it's really annoying.
And when you do that on Arcade PCV Repair, you can patch the trace or replace the TTL, or hopefully it's not a custom. But on the
so
Pi,
small.
Yeah,
it's kind of like the MiSTer, or specifically the D10 Nano, right? You do something wrong there, boy. Yeah, was a $140 mistake, and now it's a $170 mistake. So,
yeah.
Ouch.
My favorite use of the Pi in my house currently is in my arcade. I've got a TV that comes on. It's a CRTV, and it's got a Pi 2, I think, on it, and it has all the MTV videos and the commercials and Beavis and Butthead and Aeon Flux, and then those just play on repeat, and it's just a Pi with a simple Python script running. We talked about it in the Discord, but so much fun to have that, pull it down from archive and you're off to the races. So
nice.
Yeah, but that's amazing. It's a really good use. I had one with for streaming my FLAC files, and it was the client. I still have that one, the door ring one. I have one like my NAS quote unquote server is one Raspberry Pi as well. And also I have another one that I mounted. My solar panels had this module to register how much energy was being produced, but it was closed sourced and connected to their servers. So I had to reverse engineer the protocol and implemented it on the Pi and have it locally. And now they're out of business, and I can still have my logs. And the Raspberry Pi spared me that issue.
Nice.
That's cool. All right, Dope, we're going to let you go to sleep.
Well...
Oh, yeah, it's like 5:30 there, right? Or something.
You know, when it gets to the point where you've been up so long, it's sort of like, well, what's the point in going to sleep? I might as well just have breakfast
Stay
or something,
Yeah, I know that feeling.
We'll have to do it next time. We can do something on UK time for the rest of the world.
Yeah, sorry, we chose this time, but it was what worked best for the occasion.
I mean, does it sound like I'm upset by this?
No,
you're
good.
No.
I'm usually up this late on a Friday anyway, because if it wasn't this, I'd just be playing video games. So this was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. I'm very, very grateful for you inviting me, and it's been a lot of fun reading all the comments as well.
Yeah, agreed. This is a perfect Friday for me, being able to talk MiSTer and all this fun stuff we do. So appreciate everybody coming together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm trying to send the C6 to my MT32 because I changed the environment. I don't have the DOS box. Maybe I have it set up. No, I don't. No, yes, I have to. No, I don't have it set up.
This is just MIDI problems, just standard.
This is how it
Yeah.
normally goes, right?
Yeah, because improvising it is not a good idea. MIDI doesn't send C6 as a standalone file, right? It has to be grabbed inside a MIDI.
Oh yeah. I don't think you can send SYX files.
Let me check if I can. Yeah, I can do that. And if it works. Okay. Yeah, convert it to MIDI. And send in the C6. Yeah, received. Good. Yeah, sent. Okay, so thanks everybody for being around here. Also, thanks a lot to both of you for your work and for your time doing this. Flynnsbit, D0pefish, we had a great time. Thank you very much for your work and for your time.
Thank you for hosting us again. You did an awesome job. It's so fun to hear you moderate, and it was fun last time. It was fun this time too. So really do appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I second exactly what Flynn said. It's been an absolute blast, and it really doesn't matter at all to me what time it is. It was 100%, 110% worth it. So yeah, I'd be happy to do this again anytime. A lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, let me try and check if this works. Take care. I'm
Good
off.
night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.